Beneath the opulence of crowns and the allure of royal regalia, a complex web of secrets and misdeeds envelops the British monarchy. For centuries, within the stately confines of palaces and the carefully crafted images presented to the public, shadows of unacknowledged truths linger. This narrative transcends mere political machinations, diving into the obscured personal lives of the royals, lives marked by deception, concealment, and even the systematic erasure of relatives from the annals of history. The saga includes tales of contrived pregnancies and dubious lineage, revealing the extent to which the monarchy has concealed uncomfortable realities. The British royal family's history is not merely one of grandeur. It reflects a darker side of human nature, rife with contradictions and complexities that render their legacy both fascinating and unsettling. As we unveil these hidden stories, we invite discourse from across the globe, appealing to those intrigued by these enigmatic legacies. If you find this exploration into the depths of royal history compelling, consider joining our community for further revelations yet to come. The enigma surrounding the princes in the Tower evokes a profound historical paradox, one that continues to haunt the narrative of the English monarchy. The Tower of London, constructed as a sanctuary for the realm's most treasured entities, was intended to be a bastion of safety, but it became embroiled in a dark and unsettling mystery that would resonate through the ages. In 1483, two young heirs, Edward V, just 12, and his brother Richard, the Duke of York, only 9, were placed in the Tower under the auspices of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. This seemingly benign move was purportedly for the purpose of preparing them for their impending coronation. Yet, the underlying motives remain obscured by historical fog. Barely weeks after their arrival, the royal ceremony was abruptly annulled, the boys were declared illegitimate, and their uncle ascended the throne as Richard III. Subsequently, they vanished without a trace, leaving behind no remains, no memorials, and no official explanations. The monarchy's reaction to this disappearance was to engage in a collective amnesia, a state of denial that has echoed down the centuries. The mystery transcends mere disappearance. It is entwined with an extensive network of silence that each subsequent monarch inherited, a toxic legacy of unresolved scandal that permeated successive reigns of the Tudors, Stuarts, and Windsors. Numerous theories emerged, each more provocative than the last. Richard III may have orchestrated their murder to cement his hold on power. Henry VII could have sought their elimination as potential threats, or some other rogue noble could have acted unilaterally. Speculation flourished, while the Tower itself became a mere observer, its walls steeped in history. In 1674, during renovations, workmen uncovered two small skeletons beneath a staircase. The monarchy, conveniently relieved to find a semblance of resolution, interred them in Westminster Abbey with ceremonial honours, circumventing any thorough investigation. This convenient rerouting of history served to close the case on an uncomfortable truth. Yet, the crux of the mystery lies not in identifying the murderers, but in recognizing the multitude of individuals who benefited from the erasure of the princes and the emerging paradigm that allowed the monarchy to acknowledge shame without ever confronting culpability. By the 20th century, when scientists sought permission to conduct rigorous DNA analysis on the remains, Buckingham Palace tactfully declined, fearing that unveiling the truth could implicate the Crown in a historical crime and necessitate an explanation for its long-held secrecy. Thus, the monarchy engaged in its familiar ritual when faced with troubling historical realities. It polished the towers to lure tourists while discreetly locking the doors to inconvenient truths. Yet, some secrets, much like the echoes embedded within the very stones of the tower, cannot be wholly suppressed. Consider, too, that some mysteries resided not within the walls of the tower but within the very physiology of kings themselves. Henry VIII, often portrayed as the robust and formidable figure of the English Renaissance, was in reality grappling with significant physical deterioration that starkly contradicted his public image. His leg afflictions, which began after a severe jousting accident in 1536, gradually consumed him, leading to painful ulcers and infections that created a repulsive odor potent enough to clear rooms. Despite the severity of his condition, there was a collective silence surrounding the king's ailments. To reveal such decay was tantamount to admitting the monarchy's spiritual shortcomings. In an era when the king's body was viewed as an embodiment of the state's vitality, acknowledging his physical ailments would imply a weakening of the realm itself. Consequently, the royal court engaged in an elaborate charade to mask Henry's afflictions. His legs were dressed and perfumed, obscured beneath luxurious garments, and in portraits, they were either discreetly hidden or represented in an idealized manner. References to his condition in official documents were carefully couched in euphemism, as courtiers maintained a carefully curated image of strength and vitality around the king. However, behind the scenes, the reality was grim. His leg wounds refused to heal, causing him immense pain that spiraled into paranoia and cruelty, yet none connected his increasing despotism to his debilitating state. When Henry VIII succumbed in 1547, it was not his political ambitions or marital disputes that claimed his life, but rather the cumulative effects of infection, obesity, and possibly untreated diabetes. Even in death, the veneer of royal grandeur persisted. A shocking incident during his funeral journey saw his coffin burst, leading to an even more grotesque spectacle, yet churchmen repurposed this event to fuel a prophetic narrative. Historians have often shied away from engaging with such visceral truths, because the reality of the king's physical decline starkly undermines the divine right of kings. With Henry's contradictory legacy, we segue to the next chapter in this storied monarchical saga, a queen who skillfully concealed her vulnerabilities. Here lies another layer of intrigue. As we prepare to peel back the facade, 51 more secrets await, and the unfolding complexities are as tangled as the historical narratives that seek to explain them. Before we delve deeper, consider, where are you viewing this from, and what time is it? Are you indulging in this narrative at an unearthly hour, diligently pursuing the entangled histories of royalty? Engage with us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe as we embark on this compelling journey through a history rich with chaos and contradiction. In the annals of history, Queen Elizabeth I is often remembered through the lens of her carefully cultivated persona as the Virgin Queen, a figure adorned with pearls and lead in splendor, enjoying the image of a ruler untainted by marriage or scandal. However, this historical reverence obscures the scars of a deeply human experience marked by tragedy and resilience. In 1562, a mere 4 years into her reign and at the tender age of 29, Elizabeth developed a severe case of smallpox. Initially dismissed as a common cold, her condition rapidly deteriorated, leaving her delirious and her skin erupting into a rash that her court dared not acknowledge. The specter of her potential death sparked panic among her advisors, prompting clandestine discussions about her succession, should she succumb or emerge unfit to govern. Surviving the illness, Elizabeth bore a physical reminder of her ordeal, as smallpox left its notable scars, disfiguring remnants ill-suited to a sovereign whose rule relied heavily on a polished image. In a time when beauty was equated with divine approval, these imperfections were viewed not only as a personal flaw but as potentially exploitable vulnerabilities by both foreign adversaries and domestic rivals. Consequently, the portrayal of Elizabeth I transitioned into an elaborate state-managed facade. She resorted to thick applications of Venetian ceruse, a toxic whitening makeup that concealed her blemishes but took a toll on her health. Artifices such as rouge and meticulously crafted wigs masked her thinning hair, while painters were instructed to create idealistic depictions of her, shrouding the realities of aging and wear. This meticulous artifice extended to her private life, with a culture of strict secrecy surrounding her appearance. Whispers of covered mirrors and stringent discretion among her ladies-in-waiting permeated the royal court. Descriptions from contemporaries liken her later visage to a painted relic, so far removed from the reality of her humanity that one such observer faced exile for daring to expose her unadorned self. Yet, the quest for control over her image transcended mere vanity. It was a means of preserving her authority against the intrinsic vulnerabilities of life, illness, aging, and ultimately, mortality. Elizabeth crafted a legend resilient against the forces that sought to undermine her power. In her transformation into an icon, Elizabeth I mastered the art of illusion, a skill that would evolve into a tool of political dexterity. Decades later, her great-great-grandnephew Charles II would exemplify a different approach, eschewing the need for such concealment. Instead, he embraced his desires openly, maneuvering to ensure that his appetites remained unexamined in the public eye. This juxtaposition of corresponding royal methodologies highlights the intricacies of power and presentation in the tumultuous tapestry of English monarchy. Charles II stands as a particularly intriguing figure in the annals of English history, particularly regarding his relationships and offspring. Officially, he was a monarch devoid of legitimate heirs, with historical records and court documents claiming he had no children. Yet, the realm of lived reality starkly contradicted this narrative, as contemporaries could identify those who bore a striking resemblance to him, noting their presence around the royal court. In truth, Charles fathered between 12 and 14 illegitimate children through various mistresses, perhaps more than history even acknowledges. Due to the absence of heirs with his wife, Queen Catherine of Braganza, who remained childless during their marriage, these children existed on the peripheries of royal acknowledgement. While these offspring enjoyed certain privileges, such as titles and a place at court, they were acutely aware that their status came with an asterisk denoting their illegitimacy. This symbol of their uncertain place in the monarchy translated to power without permanence, wealth offered without the security of legacy or inheritance. The reason behind this carefully orchestrated concealment reveals the treacherous context of Charles's reign. Following a civil war, regicide, and the tumult of republicanism, the monarchy sought stability, a stability deeply reliant on the perceived adherence to hereditary order. In the realm of his personal life, Charles maintained an atmosphere of chaos. The court became a battleground of rivalries among his mistresses, Louise de Querouaix, Barbara Palmer, and Nell Gwynn, each vying for favor and influence. Their sons, born outside of legal and royal constraints yet raised in the heart of the palace, navigated a world riddled with contradictions. Some became pawns within Charles's political chess game, while others became scandals in their own right, as the king presented himself to the public as the merry monarch, an image of indulgence in pleasures that belied deeper national anxieties about legitimacy and identity. As the king grappled with his legacy, leaving a kingdom of echoes and faces mirroring his own, he also encountered a personal unraveling not merely of physical health but of mental stability. Charles's later years revealed a sovereign increasingly disconnected from reality, conversing with trees while his court maintained a pretense of normalcy, masking the truth of his decline. This intricate tapestry of personal struggle against a backdrop of political necessity encapsulates the duality of a monarch attempting to control the chaos of both his lineage and his own fading grasp on power. 5. The mental health crises of George III, who was affectionately dubbed Farmer George by his subjects, reflect the complex contradictions of a ruler torn between his public persona and private tribulations. This humble title was emblematic of a monarch who favored pastoral walks over the pomp of court life, was devoted to intellectual pursuits, remained steadfast in his loyalty to his wife, and appeared genuinely concerned for the welfare of his realm. Yet, lurking in the shadows of this amiable facade was another, much less flattering moniker, Mad. George III's reign surpassed those of his predecessors in duration, encompassing some of the most tumultuous events in British history, including the disintegration of the American colonies, the Napoleonic Wars, and the onset of the Industrial Revolution. However, obscured amidst these significant developments was the king's persistent struggle with a profound mental affliction, one meticulously concealed by the court until many years later. His episodes were characterized by unexplained disappearances, during which letters went unanswered and public engagements were abruptly cancelled. He would eventually return, composed and seemingly in control, yet those in his inner circle witnessed a starkly different reality. Throughout these episodes, George exhibited behavior that was increasingly erratic. He would engage in extended monologues, traverse into unrelated topics, and frequently repeat thoughts with an irrational obsession. His grasp on reality faltered. At times, he failed to recognize his family and claimed dialogues with angels. His royal declarations became nonsensical, accompanied by unpredictable outbursts of emotion, unfounded laughter or tears. Despite these alarming symptoms, the court maintained a facade of normalcy. Public explanations for the king's irregular absences ranged from vague assertions of illness to careful evasions of truth. The revelation that the monarch of the British Empire was wrestling with debilitating and intermittent mental instability remained one of the most closely guarded secrets in royal history. This cover-up extended to physicians, whose diagnoses were wrapped in euphemistic language, and correspondence that was either censored or destroyed. Official portraits captured a dignified monarch, while the governmental machinery continued to function as if all were well. Historians, long after his passing, began to illuminate the truth of George III's experiences, recognizing that what was once derided as mere eccentricity masked a profound and misunderstood affliction that plagued him throughout his life. Speculation surrounds the nature of his condition. Some theories suggest a rare hereditary disease affecting the nervous system, while others posit bipolar disorder or an amalgamation of contributing factors. What was indisputable was the undeniable impact of his failing mental health on his ability to rule and the consequent implications for the monarchy's stability. Most disturbingly, the royal response to the king's condition paved the way for a practice of silence over transparency, confinement over treatment. The prevailing strategy dictated that if the king was incapacitated, the crown's reserves of power must be redistributed and concealed to avoid chaos in governance. The acknowledgement of mental incapacity risked challenges to succession and the legitimacy of the throne itself, morphing George's personal struggles into a constitutional crisis. In his twilight years, George became almost entirely blind and deaf, confined to a realm removed from authority, with his son fulfilling his duties as Prince Regent. Nevertheless, the illusion persisted. George III was simply not available. His death in 1820, after a remarkable 60-year reign, was met with relief across the monarchy, not from a lack of compassion, but due to the successful maintenance of a fragile facade that had narrowly endured. This narrative now sets the stage for another royal figure whose buried truths revolved not around mental afflictions, but rather the illicit aspects of love and a marriage so controversial that it necessitated erasure from the annals of royal history. George IV, before he became the notorious king of extravagant regency fame, was known simply as Prinny, the charming yet extravagant Prince of Wales. His character was a study in contrasts. He revelled in lavishness, admired by artists and scorned by politicians, while simultaneously grappling with the responsibilities of leadership that he was to inherit. However, the most complex contradiction lay within his personal life, a hidden Catholic marriage that defied both law and social convention, and which the crown would deny for generations. In 1785, George IV's heart became entangled with that of Maria Fitzherbert, a widowed Roman Catholic whose very existence challenged the royal family's preferences for noble unions. Maria, marked by her intelligence and devotion, stood in stark opposition to the royal ideal, embodying everything that was deemed unsuitable. Beyond mere social disapproval, their union posed a grave legal issue. The Royal Marriages Act of 1772 required approval from the reigning monarch for any descendant of George II wishing to marry. George, foreseeing a categorical refusal, took matters into his own hands. The clandestine ceremony was held away from prying eyes, with only a handful of allies as witnesses. For George, this secret marriage signaled romance; for the monarchy, an imminent crisis. Should their union ever be deemed legitimate, it would jeopardize his claim to the throne due to the laws prohibiting Catholics or those married to Catholics from ascending. Thus, secrecy was paramount. George publicly renounced the marriage, all the while indulging in public vices and maintaining a hidden liaison with Maria. Political exigencies compelled him into a disastrous marriage with Caroline of Brunswick, an arrangement he navigated without emotional investment. Throughout his rule, official silence enveloped the Fitz-Herbert union. While whispers circulated within court circles, none dared to disseminate the scandalous truth. The situation remained unchanged until Maria's death in 1837, when personal artifacts were uncovered, revealing their signed marriage certificate. Yet, rather than confronting the scandal, the monarchy relegated this evidence back into obscurity. It wasn't until nearly a century later that historians would discuss this marriage, relegating Maria's existence to a mere footnote in history. As George IV reigned over a kingdom noted for its flamboyance, he carried this unacknowledged scandal, an enduring symbol of the complexities underpinning royal bloodlines and the facades maintained by those in power. Unseen yet pervasive, Maria's legacy threatened the narrative of dynastic purity that had long defined the monarch. As George's hidden truths cast long shadows, the impending ascension of the next queen would soon raise even more profound inquiries regarding bloodlines, questions that would delve into the fraught realm of race. Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, the spouse of King George III, presents a fascinating case in the historical interplay of race and royalty, culminating in a nearly two-century-long narrative of her image and identity. Commonly depicted in portraits that exemplify the ideals of European aristocracy, pale skin, meticulous powdered hair, and an air of regal distance, these representations projected an unchallenged lineage. Yet, beneath the polished surface of these artworks lingered whispers of a hidden truth, the possibility of African ancestry associated with the Queen. The notion, long relegated to the realm of fringe speculation, found roots in subtle yet undeniable features observed in Charlotte's early likenesses. Here, a departure from the Eurocentric standard became apparent. A broader nose, fuller lips, and tightly curled hair often camouflaged beneath aristocratic grooming. Notably, Sir Allan Ramsay, an esteemed portrait artist of the period, presented Charlotte in a manner that diverged from later, more idealized renditions, yet such observations were hastily dismissed as inconsequential or impolite. The discourse surrounding her lineage simmered quietly until the advent of modern genealogical exploration reignited inquiries. Researchers uncovered tantalizing traces of ancestry leading back to a Portuguese noble line, the Dubious family, among whom figures were identified as being of Moorish descent. Within the context of 13th century Europe, Moorish encompassed individuals of North African, Muslim, or mixed race backgrounds, often implied to signal darker skin tones. This potential ancestry bore uncomfortable implications. If substantiated, it would reveal that the British monarchy, entrenched in notions of pure racial lineage, possessed a queen consort of mixed heritage during the 18th century, implying that George III progeny could likewise share African descent. Such revelations would fundamentally challenge the very tenets of aristocratic racial superiority foundational to colonial narratives, intersecting with a larger cultural fabric of prejudice. However, The royal institution remained reticent on this matter, perpetuating silence while historians loyal to established narratives relegated the evidence to circumstantial claims. Royal biographers, keen on preserving a veneer of ambiguity, sought to undermine any assertions that could disrupt the narrative of ethno-racial uniformity. Consequently, the monarchy's historical tendency to allow time to obscure uncomfortable truths played out, even as remnants of the rumor persisted, resurfacing with renewed vigor through scholarly discourse and modern interpretations of Charlotte's legacy. Contemporary discussions resurface the dimensions of race that, in the past, was seldom broached in polite society, with the revisiting of Charlotte's identity prompting questions around her racial classification. Was she black, mixed race, or merely a woman of a slightly darker European complexion misinterpreted by modern perspectives? The quest for definitive answers remained elusive, underlying the notion that the narrative transcended physical attributes. This account illustrates the monarchy's zealous efforts to present a sanitized version of a past that did not conform to their ideals. While Charlotte's heritage may evade complete elucidation, the institutional compulsion to idealize, erase, or redefine her identity speaks volumes about the monarchy itself. As her visage was softened in artistic renderings and her ancestry carefully curated in documentation, the legacy of her existence continues to reverberate, evoking deeper reflections on identity and power. This segue draws us to another prominent royal figure, whose life was not merely marked by speculation but was a veritable spectacle of scandal, an irrefutable testament to the complexities of regal existence. Queen Caroline of Brunswick's tumultuous personal life is a narrative rife with scandal and intrigue, challenging the conventions of monarchy in early 19th century England. Though never intended to ascend the throne, Caroline burst into public consciousness with her bold, unconventional demeanor, acting as a necessary foil to her husband, King George IV, whose own life was laden with political obligation and personal disgrace. Their union was arranged primarily to alleviate George's financial burdens rather than foster genuine affection. He had never set eyes on Caroline prior to their wedding, and his shock upon meeting her was palpable. Reportedly, he sought brandy to tolerate the situation. Their wedding night turned out to be an unmitigated disaster. George later claimed intoxication led him to collapse into a fireplace. Although they bore a daughter, Princess Charlotte, their marriage quickly soured, leading to an unofficial and acrimonious separation. However, the real scandal did not arise from their despairing union, as royal marriages often upheld political necessity, but rather from Caroline's unapologetic refusal to adhere to the expectations of genteel womanhood. Instead of retreating into obscurity, she fiercely embraced her identity as the aggrieved spouse. Traveling through Europe with an eclectic entourage, she attracted notoriety and hostility, becoming scapegoated for societal transgressions like alleged infidelity and disregard for propriety, even as she skillfully navigated her own public image. The monarchy, feeling undermined by her audacity, initiated an inquiry into her behavior in 1813, dubbed the Delicate Investigation. Witnesses were coerced, records meticulously inspected, all in a futile attempt to corroborate accusations of her moral failing. When George IV assumed the throne in 1820, he faced Caroline's emergence from exile, confidently asserting her claim to the title of Queen Consort. His response was a parliamentary initiative aimed at stripping her of her royal status, transforming the matter into a public trial rife with sensationalism. The trial galvanized public support for Caroline. She emerged as a complex emblem of rebellion against royal duplicity, symbolically resisting a system that consistently protected male misdeeds. Despite the failed attempt to legally remove her title, preventing her attendance at George's coronation, Caroline remained a legally recognized queen until her death, shrouded in mystery and possibly foul play. Her last wish, to be remembered as Caroline of Brunswick, the wounded Queen of England, reflects both her plight and the enduring cautionary legacy that such nonconformity provoked within royal lineage. Her story serves as a poignant reminder of the precarious position of women in the monarchy and the lengths to which royal establishments would go to maintain control over their narratives. In this complex tapestry of power, secrecy, and gender, the echoes of Caroline's life reverberate through the annals of European history, illustrating the enduring impact of her resistance against entrenched patriarchal norms. Queen Victoria, often dubbed the grandmother of Europe, wielded unprecedented influence over a vast empire as Empress of India and mother to 9 children. Her legacy extended beyond mere territorial expansion. It intricately entwined the royal bloodlines of nations from Moscow to Madrid, establishing dynastic ties that would shape European history. However, a hereditary secret lurked behind the imposing imperial facade, a genetic legacy that brought fragility and premature death to the royal houses she connected. This ailment was haemophilia, a condition that Victoria herself carried unknowingly at first, leading historians to speculate that the mutation likely originated with her, as there were no recorded occurrences in prior generations. While some theorized it to be a spontaneous genetic anomaly, whispers of illegitimacy emerged, suggesting her biological father might not be Prince Edward, but another individual bearing the haemophilia gene. Nevertheless, the monarchy chose to quash such speculations, prioritizing the sanctity of the royal line over the potential scandal. Among Victoria's children, at least 3 became carriers of the gene, with her son, Prince Leopold, suffering the full effects of haemophilia. His tragic death at 30 from complications after a fall left a legacy of the disease, passed on to his daughter. Princess Alice, another daughter, transmitted the condition to the Russian imperial family via her daughter Alexandra, the wife of Tsar Nicholas II. Their son, Alexei, would come to epitomize the disorder, leading to clandestine measures aimed at concealment, culminating in the involvement of mystics like Rasputin. The ramifications of this genetic inheritance stretched across Europe, yet the British monarchy maintained a veil of silence. Described euphemistically as a delicate condition, Helena's struggles were not publicized. Photographs portrayed her in regal stillness while avoiding depictions of her condition. Silence marked the royal approach to this inconvenient truth, as Victoria's pragmatic focus on political marriages overshadowed the medical repercussions of her legacy. In seeking to unify Europe through dynastic alliances, Victoria inadvertently fostered a shared vulnerability among her descendants, accompanied by revolutions and tragedies. While her children ascended to thrones, many of their heirs succumbed quietly to an unspoken affliction. Though Victoria's empire adept ignored the harsh realities of its bloodlines, one child, grappling with the powerful dual weight of haemophilia, was hidden from public view, a poignant reminder of the vulnerabilities that lingered beneath the surface of royal grandeur. Prince Leopold's life remains one of the more poignant yet overlooked narratives within the annals of Queen Victoria's lineage. Unlike his brothers, who ardently pursued military and political feats, Leopold found himself ensconced in an invisible sphere, shielded from the public gaze under the pretext of nobility. Officially lauded as an articulate connoisseur of the arts, he was, in truth, caught in the grip of a body that betrayed the royal expectations placed upon him. From the moment of his birth, Leopold's frailty set him apart. He exhibited a propensity for bruising and struggled with prolonged injuries and difficult clotting. Medical examinations swiftly revealed he suffered from haemophilia, a term seldom uttered in the hallowed precincts of the court, signifying a life shrouded in extreme caution. While his brothers were honed for the rigors of knighthood, Leopold was constrained to the stillness of silence. Compounded by his haemophilia, Leopold also suffered from epilepsy, a condition steeped in stigma, feared and considered a marker of madness rather than a medical ailment. The weight of this dual diagnosis forced the palace to further suppress the narrative surrounding his condition, with episodes of seizures delicately described as mere nervous turns. Thus, he led a life characterized by an entrapment of secrecy and quiet suffering, shielded from a world that demanded perfection from its royals. Queen Victoria's affinity for her son was clear, perhaps fueled by his reliance on her. Yet this maternal affection was interlaced with anxiety about what his frailty signified, an unsettling breach in the facade of royal infallibility. In an effort to regulate his life meticulously, from his education to his eventual courtship, Victoria's intentions were protective but suffocating. Despite this, Leopold craved autonomy and actively sought a role beyond the shadows, championing the arts and sciences, ultimately achieving the presidency of the Society for Arts. His intellect shone through in his articulate speeches and elegant correspondence, illustrating a man who possessed the intellect worthy of a crown, yet whose physical limitations rendered him a prisoner within his own identity. In a remarkable turn, at the age of 30, Leopold married Princess Helena of Waldeck and Pyrmont, defying not only health expectations but also the quiet standards of the court. Yet, the spectre of his ailments loomed over this happiness, every movement wrought with danger and calculation. Tragically, just 2 years later, a simple misstep led to a cerebral hemorrhage, culminating in his untimely death, far from the royal court and under the vague auspices of an injury. While the palace expressed condolences and the media provided sanitized obituaries, the grim irony remained unspoken. The son of the Queen succumbed to complications of a condition the monarchy could not openly acknowledge. His burial was adorned with royal honors, but the legacy that followed him was that of a medical case rather than a regal nod, echoing not through grand monuments but within the pages of medical journals. Leopold's existence stands as a testament to the hidden struggles of royalty, where human fragility often collided with the burdens of institutional decorum. Despite the lessons of his life, history would repeat itself. In ensuing generations, similar fates awaited other royal children, whose worthiness was eclipsed by their incongruence with the narrative of an invulnerable monarchy. Thus, the tragedy of Prince Leopold reflects the broader complexities of royal responsibilities, a compelling reminder of the delicate interplay between duty, identity, and the harrowing realities of health. Prince Albert's untimely death has long sparked debates among historians, presenting a complex portrait of a man who transcended his role as a mere husband to Queen Victoria, becoming a pivotal figure in the evolution of the British monarchy. Hailing from the German duchies of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, he entered a skeptical England and spent 2 transformative decades modernizing the monarchy, infusing it with a sense of morality, rationality, and greater public engagement. As a patron of science, education, and the arts, Albert significantly altered Britain's global image, most notably through his orchestration of the Great Exhibition. When he passed away at 42 in 1861, the official narrative attributed his demise to typhoid fever contracted during a visit to Cambridge. The media heralded it as a tragedy, while the Queen described it as catastrophic, leading the monarchy to consider the matter closed. Yet, the documentary integrity of that diagnosis has been questioned. Albert had been suffering from significant health issues for years. Chronic digestive problems, fatigue, insomnia, and notable weight loss plague him. Close confidants and physicians suspected a more serious illness may have been at play, though these notions were never publicly aired. Contemporary speculations surround his cause of death, with some experts proposing Crohn's disease, stomach cancer, or kidney failure as possible culprits. Others suggest that a combination of misdiagnosed and poorly managed ailments might have contributed to his decline, further complicating the narrative. However, the true enigma lies not merely in the specifics of his medical condition but in the reasons for the obfuscation of the facts surrounding his death. The royal family had compelling motivations for promoting the typhoid fever explanation, presenting Albert as the figure of modern virtue, whose downfall could not be convincingly attributed to chronic illness or decay. For Victoria, a straightforward narrative was essential. His death needed to resonate with profound meaning, allowing for collective mourning rather than scrutiny. This careful construction around Albert's death permitted her to foster a mythology of grief that would characterize her reign for the following 4 decades. In predictable fashion, she donned black for the remainder of her life, retreated from public engagement, and commissioned tributes, from statues to chapels, transforming Albert into a patron saint of sorts, a spectre guiding the empire. Any challenges to this narrative were quietly suppressed. The physicians who tended to Albert faced no inquiries, and the results of an autopsy, if it had taken place, have never surfaced. As a result, the real circumstances surrounding the deterioration of this key figure in Britain's age of progress remained shrouded in silence. His life was reduced to mere symbol, his death became a lasting monument, and a medical puzzle concealed within the fabric of mourning. Conversely, the next royal intrigue involved deliberate tactical concealment, illustrating the extensive lengths to which the monarchy would go to manipulate the narrative surrounding death and public perception. In the twilight of 1936, as King George V approached death, a peculiar phenomenon unfolded that transcended mere mortality. It was a profound interplay of public relations, legacy crafting, and the nuances of royal duty. The nation held its breath, not simply pondering the inevitability of death but rather fixating on the orchestrated timing of the king's passing, a death meticulously staged for the front pages rather than for intimate farewell. George V, heralded as a pivotal figure in the establishment of the modern monarchy, was not destined to fade quietly into the night. Instead, he was deliberately guided towards his end with an exactness that would ensure his demise aligned seamlessly with the needs of both the press and the monarchy's public image. The official narrative cited bronchitis exacerbated by long-standing health issues as the cause of death. Yet, the truth that emerged from Lord Dawson of Penn's diary, uncovered long after the events, unveiled a chilling strategy. As the king sank toward unconsciousness, Dawson administered a lethal combination of morphine and cocaine, illustrating not an act of compassion but a calculated maneuver to ensure the announcement of the king's death would grace the morning papers instead of the evening editions. This was a death choreographed with precision, stripped of the drama typically associated with such moments, designed to serve a narrative more than to honor the life it concluded. This quiet euthanasia, performed without the sanction of law or public awareness, raises profound ethical inquiries. Was the royal family complicit in this decision-making? Had the government offered its counsel? Might George V have survived longer in the absence of intervention? Or were Dawson's actions in alignment with unspoken royal desires? These questions loomed large yet went unanswered, silenced by an unwritten understanding that the crown must appear invulnerable until the very end. On the anticipated day, the press echoed perfectly timed tributes, proclaiming the king's death as planned. The funeral arrangements unfolded like clockwork, framing a legacy that was carefully sculpted, revealing the extent to which the monarchy was dedicated to its image. Dawson, despite his controversial actions, maintained his standing within the medical community, while the diary remained concealed for decades, with the edited nature of the king's final moments hidden from public discourse. This episode, emblematic of the monarchy's intricate performance, illustrates that the drama of royal life extended even to the final moments of a king, where timing and optics reigned supreme. Moreover, this meticulously curated narrative raises further reflections about the crown's treatment of individuals deemed less palatable for public gaze. One can only imagine the measures taken to shield a child from sight, a boy born into an existence overshadowed by silence and secrecy, hidden behind barriers intended to obscure his very existence. His story, nearly erased from history, serves as yet another testament to the complexities and contradictions that define not only a king's death but the monarchy's overarching narrative. Prince John stands as a poignant figure in the annals of the British monarchy. an embodiment of the complexities and contradictions that often shadow royal life. The younger son of King George V and Queen Mary, he remains largely an overlooked character in historical discourse, not due to disgrace or scandal, but through a deliberate erasure from public consciousness. His life, truncated by illness, was characterized by a significant seclusion from the world that celebrated his lineage, spending much of his time hidden away, shielded from both the media's gaze and the loving warmth typically expected within royal families. Diagnosed posthumously with epilepsy and possibly autism, John's existence becomes a telling reflection of societal attitudes in early 20th century Britain, a period when disabilities were not only misunderstood but fiercely stigmatized. Initially, John was raised alongside his siblings at Sandringham, yet as his health declined and his behavior diverged from the aristocratic norms, the palace's treatment of him shifted to one of neglect. Rather than be viewed as the innocent child he was, his epilepsy and behavioral eccentricities were seen as burdens, elements incongruent with the monarchy's carefully curated facade of perfection. John's relocation to Wood Farm, a small, private space on the royal estate, marks a significant turning point in his life, symbolizing his quiet removal from the public eye. He was cared for with kindness, yet he experienced profound isolation, with periodic parental visits and minimal acknowledgement from his siblings. The monarchy took steps to erase his existence from idiomatic royal life. His name gradually faded from official records, and his image was strikingly absent from family portraits. In essence, he was not formally exiled, but rather rendered invisible. His death in 1919, following a seizure, was met with a starkly understated funeral, further silencing his narrative. The brief obituaries that followed offered no context or recognition of a life lived, a life that was abruptly reduced to a mere footnote in history. It was not until much later, through the unveiling of private correspondence and testimonies from those who had known him, that John's story, marked by both fragility and depth, began to re-emerge. His caregivers remembered him as gentle and inquisitive, an affectionate boy enamored with nature, a stark contrast to how the royal institution had perceived him, where he was weighed down by the expectations of image over intrinsic worth. John's existence challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about the monarchy's reliance on an illusion of flawlessness, a performance undermined by the presence of a child marked by disability. His story, once shrouded in silence, serves as a reminder of the price of maintaining such a facade. While the monarchy has made strides toward acknowledging and embracing disability in recent years, the tale of Prince John remains a somber reflection of what becomes of humanity when overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of public admiration. His life was characterized not by scandal but by the very act of its erasure, a compelling commentary on the often brutal intersection of identity and responsibility within the pages of royal history. Edward VI's association with Nazi sympathies remains a contentious chapter in British history, often overshadowed by the romantic narrative of his abdication for love. The tale of Edward VIII, who relinquished his royal responsibilities for the American divorcee Wallis Simpson, has long been cast as a tragic saga of love and sacrifice, polished to perfection over decades. Yet, beneath this glossy veneer lies a more distressing reality. Edward, who briefly held the title of king, exhibited an alarming affinity for the authoritarianism represented by the Nazis, a sentiment that had been an open secret among political circles. Long before his short-lived reign, Edward expressed a troubling admiration for autocratic governance, fostering a belief that effective leadership required control over the unpredictable nature of democracy. In private conversations, such musings were often tolerated, yet when coupled with a fascination for Nazi Germany, they became a source of consternation. The official narrative of the royal family, then and now, often paints Edward as merely naive and poorly advised. However, the recently declassified Marburg files hint at a more insidious awareness. In 1937, mere months post-abdication, Edward and Simpson travelled to Germany, incurring the disapproval of the British government. Their arrival was met with the warm embrace of Nazi elites, where they engaged in a series of ostentatious activities, from factory tours to encounters with prominent officials, including an infamous visit to Adolf Hitler himself. The images from this time are unsettling. Edward, now a figure stripped of his crown, appeared to emulate a salute, which he insisted was merely a gesture of greeting, an assertion met with skepticism by historians. British intelligence was particularly alarmed by the intercepted communications indicating that German diplomats perceived Edward as sympathetic to their ambitions. There lingered the troubling possibility that, had Britain succumbed to Nazi invasion, Edward might have been reinstated as a puppet ruler. Operation Willy, a plan devised by the Nazis, even contemplated his abduction during the war to facilitate such a reinstatement. While clear evidence of treachery remains elusive, the ambiguity surrounding Edward's alliances suggests a troubling flexibility in his loyalties. In response to growing concerns, the royal family endeavored to mitigate the repercussions, relegating Edward to the governorship of the Bahamas, a strategic exile that disguised his sidelining. There, he became increasingly morose, his drinking habits intensifying while he lamented his diminished role. For years, the public narrative adhered to the romanticism of abdication while sidelining the disquieting associations with Nazism. The royal family's efforts to preserve its reputation positioned Edward in the periphery of royal photographs, present but silent. In recent times, however, the troubling extent of Edward's sympathies has emerged with greater clarity, suggesting that his admiration for an authoritarian regime posed a significant threat to the nation he once led. It was not merely love that prompted his exile, it was the admiration for an ideology that necessitated silence from a monarchy eager to dissociate from the missteps of its past. Furthermore, the legacy of Wallis Simpson did not end with Edward. Her own entanglements would emerge in the narratives of intelligence reports, returning in unforeseen ways long after the dust had settled on their tumultuous saga. Wallis Simpson occupies a unique and controversial position in the annals of British royal history, often characterized as the architect of a royal downfall. Distinguished yet polarizing, the American divorcee stepped into the limelight with an elegance that belied her tumultuous impact on the monarchy. Public perception painted her as a seductive villain, whose affair with Edward VIII precipitated his abdication, an act that upended the very fabric of constitutional monarchy. Behind the palace walls, however, she was seen as a more troublesome PR dilemma, sparking extensive scrutiny and speculation. Yet, beneath this surface narrative lay a more intricate portrait that caught the attention of international intelligence agencies, a realm where her social standing morphed into something far more consequential. For years, official accounts dismissed Wallis as a mere social climber, yet a veil of secrecy enshrouded intelligence dossiers from MI5, the FBI, and even Nazi Germany, suggesting she was much more than a mere royal consort. They depicted a woman under surveillance, her interactions scrutinized, raising questions about potential espionage or the exchange of sensitive information. Long before the 1936 abdication crisis erupted, intelligence reports suggested a buzz around her connections with German officials. Diplomatic conversations transcribed during extravagant gatherings painted a picture of a woman whose words carried weight, whether from boldness or recklessness. The idea of Wallis mingling socially with figures deemed adversaries by Britain only exacerbated the tension, creating layers of complexity in her motivations and affiliations. Described in some German communications as a favored ally of the Reich, the nuances of her alleged loyalty remained shrouded in ambiguity, oscillating between flattery and deep ideological connections. During wartime, the stakes intensified, with American agents closely monitoring her correspondence amidst fears of foreign influence or information leaks. Speculation arose regarding financial ties to foreign agents and romantic connections with prominent Nazi figures, all blurring the lines between scandal, propaganda, and truth. Was she a spy acting with intent, a sympathizer captivated by hostile ideologies, or simply an aristocrat ensnared in a web from which she could not extricate herself? Though the intelligence files lacked definitive proof, they illustrated the precariousness of her position and how assiduously the British monarchy sought to dissociate itself from any notion of liability connected to her. In the eyes of the monarchy, Edward's turbulent reign posed sufficient challenges without Wallace exacerbating the situation. More than a mere accessory of scandal, she engaged actively in the social sphere, hosting soirees, adorning high fashion, and contributing to media narratives, yet all the while remaining a carefully surveilled subject. The efforts to suppress her relevance were conspicuous, culminating in a concerted effort to keep intelligence reports secret for decades. It was only in the long aftermath of turmoil that these fragmented narratives began to surface, echoing with hushed tones of complexity and intrigue. The saga of Wallace Simpson transcended the personal, interlocking with the fate of the crown in ways that threatened to entangle it in far darker realities than a mere romantic entanglement. The repercussions of such entwinement reverberated through generations, ultimately haunting Edward's successor, marking a path that would lead into a tragic legacy intertwined with unanswered questions and the weight of royal history on the lonely Scottish hillsides, a tragic reminder of the far-reaching implications of the choices made in the shadows of power and desire. The enigmatic 1942 air crash involving the Duke of Kent prompts an intriguing exploration into the life of a royal whose persona seemed augured by duty and charm. Prince George, the Duke of Kent, was the charismatic younger brother of King George VI, a distinguished naval officer whose dashing good looks and elegant demeanor set him apart, imbuing him with a reputation for charisma and understated competence that was rarely observed among his royal kin. Despite appearing to be a significant asset to the monarchy, his sudden death in a plane crash gave rise to an enduring mystery, the details of which remain shrouded in ambiguity. On August 25, 1942, the Duke boarded an RAF Sunderland flying boat destined for an ostensibly military mission to Iceland, presented as a routine morale visit during the bleak era of World War II. Tragically, the aircraft descended into a remote Scottish hillside near Dunbeath, resulting in the deaths of 14 individuals, with only one survivor to tell the tale. The official narrative attributed the disaster to pilot error, a miscalculation deemed unfortunate, yet skepticism persisted regarding the particulars of the incident. Questions lingered about the Duke's presence on such a flight, given the lack of a pressing reason for his participation. Why were sensitive documents reported aboard? What prompted the plane to fly under dire weather conditions, contravening standard protocols? Furthermore, rumors cast a shadow over the mission's integrity, hinting at a clandestine destination beyond Iceland, perhaps Sweden or even a less neutral locale. Speculation arose of a secret diplomatic engagement, even potentially unauthorized negotiations with Nazi operatives, an exploration of peace efforts conducted outside Churchill's knowledge. No concrete evidence emerged to validate these claims, yet the whispers continued unabated. Complicating matters further was the Duke's intricate personal life, intertwined with both esteemed acquaintances and dubious connections. Allegations of affairs, innuendo in gossip columns, and ties to figures later associated with intelligence operations painted a portrait of a royal straddling the line between public elegance and private mystery. Following the crash, the royal household acted decisively, facilitating a funeral shrouded in dignified sorrow. However, the shroud of mystery surrounding the incident persisted, as the crash was not merely abrupt, it reeked of suspicion. The mission was clouded in opacity, the Duke's demise symbolizing not only the loss of a beloved prince but potentially exposing underlying issues within the royal framework. The notion that a charismatic figure could disappear so entirely into obscurity signals broader, unsettling implications. Who else might have similarly been erased from memory, not by solemn ceremonies but through an unsettling silence? In due course, the answer resided within a mental institution, where those individuals were not merely forgotten. They were inscribed as deceased in the official records, inviting even deeper examination into the intermingling of royal duty with shadowy undercurrents. In the shadows of the British royal family's historical narrative lies the enigmatic lives of Narissa and Catherine Boleyn, first cousins to Queen Elizabeth II, whose existence was inconspicuously scrubbed from public records, marking them as deceased in official accounts. In truth, the daughters of John Boleyn, the Queen Mother's brother, were alive, yet functionally marginalized from the royal lineage. Both women faced severe learning disabilities, precluding them from attaining the societal roles bestowed upon their aristocratic heritage. Rather than embrace them as part of the family, the royal institution opted for a grave solution. In 1941, the sisters were institutionalized at the Royal Earlswood Hospital, a facility that reflected the era's prejudices against those with intellectual disabilities. There, Narissa and Catherine, effectively erased from both familial and public consciousness, spent decades within stark confines, legally declared dead in genealogical records, one noted to have died in 1940, the other in 1961, by family decree, ensuring their lives were buried alongside the stigma of their conditions. The reality, however, paints a more poignant picture. Narissa passed away in 1986, while Catherine lived until 2014, largely unaware of their royal connection. They were described by caretakers as gentle, loving, and non-verbal individuals, unaware of the royal celebrations broadcast on television, where their kin were prominently featured. Their living conditions lacked acknowledgement of their birthdays, and at one juncture, Narissa's grave was reduced to a mere identification tag. It was not until a provocative newspaper expose in 1987 that their plight captured public attention, eliciting a backlash and enduring queries about the royal family's values and the erasure of its own members. The palace's official reaction dismissed it as a personal matter, while some defenders suggested the decisions were taken out of concern for the sisters' well-being. Yet, such justifications fell short in the face of the alarming truth concerning the false death proclamations. The essence of this tragic tale implicates the monarchy's depth of concern. Where appearances often reign supreme, the reality of imperfection proves too threatening to the narrative of inherited privilege. The Boleyn sisters' story is not isolated. It intertwines with broader narratives of hidden lives and clandestine affairs within the monarchy, hinting at a complex tapestry woven with secrecy and the often harsh realities of royal existences. The German origins of the British monarchy, an examination of identity and legacy. Despite their iconic imagery of Union Jacks and royal pageantry from the balconies of Buckingham Palace, the British royal family's bloodline reveals a strikingly German heritage, particularly when considering the evolution of their identity. The lineage that we now recognize as the House of Windsor only adopted this name in 1917, previously known as the Houses of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, rooted in dynastic ties that extended back to German princely families. This German connection can be traced specifically to the Act of Settlement of 1701, which mandated that only Protestants could inherit the throne. The nearest Protestant heir, Sophia of Hanover, a granddaughter of James I, embodied this German ancestry. Her offspring, George Louis, acceded to the throne in 1714 following the death of Queen Anne, establishing the Hanoverian dynasty. Here began an era marked by a monarch who was more fluent in German than in English, accompanied by a court that mirrored continental customs. The line continued with George II, George III, and into the era of Queen Victoria, lauded as a cornerstone of British identity, yet whose lineage also stemmed from these German roots. Her husband,
Prince Albert, further infused German traditions and values into the royal sphere. When their son, Edward VII, took the throne, the family name shifted to Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a title that became increasingly problematic as sentiments surged against Germany leading up to the First World War. By 1917, the British public's animosity toward their German rivals necessitated a drastic rebranding for the monarchy amid wartime struggles. Recognizing the precariousness of their position, King George V proclaimed a new name for the family, the House of Windsor, a title imbued with Anglo-Saxon strength and national pride. The rebranding involved more than a name change. It sought to alter perceptions of identity. German relatives were stripped of their titles and the family adopted anglicized versions of their names, all in an attempt to project a lineage more firmly entrenched in British soil. The reality, however, remained unchanged. No alteration to their genetic heritage occurred. They retained their German lineage beneath the surface gloss of a new image. This reinvention of identity found swift acceptance among the public, facilitated by an eager press that lauded the transformation. Yet, even today, the deep-rooted German origins of the Windsors are often relegated to the periphery of historical discourse, presenting a nuanced dilemma concerning national identity and the fragility of allegiance when intertwined with the crown's legacy. As the royal family busied themselves with redefining their narrative, they simultaneously marginalized parts of their family tree, shrouding relatives, both distant and close, who contradicted the polished image they sought to project. This duality highlights not only inconsistencies within royal identity but also reflects broader themes in history regarding the constructed nature of power and the influence of perception in shaping national and royal legacies. Queen Elizabeth's second hidden cousins, both with disabilities, represent one of the more unsettling aspects of the British royal family's history. This narrative is not based on mere whispers. Rather, it was officially documented in Burke's Peerage 1963 edition. Within the entry for the Beauce-Lyon lineage, associated with the Queen Mother, the names Narissa and Catherine appear, marked as deceased. However, this was a deliberate misrepresentation. Both women were alive, remaining in a state of institutionalization at the Royal Earlswood Hospital in Red Hill, a mental institution that had housed them far from royal life for several decades. As first cousins to the Queen, daughters of the Queen Mother's brother, Narissa and Catherine were born into privilege and held a legitimate connection to the monarchy. Yet, following the revelation of their developmental disabilities, the royal family's response was strikingly swift and devoid of compassion. Utilizing the euphemisms common of the era, mentally deficient and incapacitated, the family chose to exile them from all royal engagements and public scrutiny. Their institutionalization raised significant ethical concerns, but the true scandal lay in the deliberate erasure of their existence from royal records and public consciousness. Documents falsely indicated their demise, while they continued to live in a dilapidated facility where their birthdays were marked only by the passing of time, and their royal lineage remained unacknowledged. The death of Narissa in 1986 was met with continued silence from the palace, her interment in an unadorned grave marked initially only by a plastic tag, a stark contrast to the royal prestige. It was only through media outrage that a more respectful memorial was eventually established. Catherine lived until 2014, spending nearly a century in obscured existence, treated as a secret rather than individuals deserving of life and dignity. When this revelation emerged in the late 1980s, public outrage was palpable. The monarchy, an enduring symbol of national identity and family values, faced intense scrutiny for its cold detachment from its own. Official responses ranged from ignorant denial to veiled embarrassment, with the Queen Mother reportedly articulating, "What a terrible thing," as though it were an event concerning strangers rather than her own family.
This episode reflects a profound truth about the royal institution's management of imperfection, which has historically involved banishment rather than embrace. The royal family, in its attempts to erase the existence of Narissa and Catherine, inadvertently exposed a deeper contradiction. While striving for a veneer of perfection, it denied its own humanity. This pattern resonates beyond the realm of health and ethical standards. It extends into matters of love and personal relationships, where any emotion deemed inappropriate, not bound by law but by royal expectations, was similarly swept into the shadows. The ensuing narrative diverges from themes of disability or institutional failings, shifting toward a rich exploration of a romance that dared to challenge the rigid frameworks of royal doctrine, an affair deemed too human for a lineage obsessed with flawlessness. Princess Margaret epitomized the tensions of royal life, casting herself as a rebellious figure, characterized by her penchant for smoking and her acerbic wit, who often hinted at making scandalous remarks over a glass of gin. Despite exuding glamour, her existence was marred by discontent, resembling a darker twist on the fairy tale of royalty. The exquisite trappings surrounding her life masked a profound lack of freedom, a truth starkly illustrated by her secret affair with Group Captain Peter Townsend. A decorated war hero and a member of the royal household, Townsend's divorce status became the fatal flaw of their romance, amid an era when divorce was anathema to royal dignity. The Church of England's harsh stance against remarriage while an ex-spouse was living escalated the dilemma. Margaret's infatuation with Townsend, a man 16 years her senior, ignited a wave of concern among royal advisers. The affair became public following a photograph of a seemingly innocuous moment during the Queen's coronation, where Margaret adjusted Townsend's uniform. This incident prompted a media firestorm, leading the royal household to escalate their attempts to quash the growing scandal. Margaret received an ultimatum. To marry Townsend would mean renouncing her title, her financial support, and her place in a line of succession. Ultimately, while Margaret's decision appeared to be hers, it was steeped in centuries of tradition and institutional pressure. Years of waiting ensued, during which Townsend was reassigned to Brussels under the guise of a promotion. As public anticipation swelled, Margaret eventually declared in 1955 her intention not to marry Townsend, citing her awareness of the Church's teachings and her duty to the Commonwealth. This statement, meticulously crafted, concealed the anguish deeper within, a pain that the royal institution could not address. Although Townsend lived until 1995, Margaret's path diverged. She married photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones, a complicated partnership that ended in divorce, with emotional scars left unhealed. The monarchy, preoccupied with appearances, chose tradition over genuine human experience, obstructing Margaret's pursuit of love with all its complexities. Ironically, decades later, her nephew would wed a divorcee without the slightest constitutional concern, illuminating the shifting tides of royal norms. Yet in the 1950s, love was not a privilege, it was perceived as a peril. In fact, Margaret's challenges to the crown did not cease with Townsend. Her defiance heralded the emergence of a more formidable entity, as she increasingly disregarded the constraints imposed upon her. Princess Margaret's vibrant party lifestyle emerged as a poignant response to the constraints imposed by royal expectations. Denied the opportunity to marry her true love, she resolved to embrace the life available to her, albeit with a touch of defiance. Thus, the younger sister of the Queen embraced a reputation as the monarchy's most audacious figure, embarking on a whirlwind of glamour marked by extravagant cocktails, celebrity friendships, and tropical getaways, much to the chagrin of the royal establishment, which struggled in vain to conceal her escapades. Margaret's existence was a carefully cultivated counter-narrative to traditional royal decorum. Frequenting the lively haunts of London Soho, she mingled with the avant-garde, rubbing shoulders with artists, musicians,
and the likes of the Beatles and Elizabeth Taylor. Her social engagements, which deviated sharply from the sober realm of the monarchy, were not merely acts of rebellion but assertions of her identity. Growing up within the confines of royal expectations, Margaret became a prominent figure whose life was scrutinized and manipulated by palace operatives. Her unpredictability became a hallmark. She was known for her biting comments at social gatherings and her antics requiring footmen to bear ashtrays in her vicinity. However, beneath the facade of exuberance lay a tumultuous personal life. Her marriage to Lord Snowdon, once a liberating alliance, became riddled with mutual betrayals and public disillusionment, culminating in a separation in 1976 and a divorce 2 years later. This marked a significant historical moment as she became the first senior royal to divorce since Henry VIII, a development the palace was reluctant to publicize. As Margaret's health faltered and her appearances grew increasingly erratic, the institution aimed to safeguard her image, not from affection, but as a matter of tradition. Conceding that a member of the royal family was in distress was unthinkable, and thus the monarchy opted to endure the cycle of embarrassment rather than confront it. Yet, Margaret's legacy became one of undeniable significance, illustrating how public scrutiny, personal suffering, and the weight of obligation can profoundly affect even the most privileged individuals. She stood as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the human cost of royal life, with her rebellion giving way to contradictions that the palace would soon find themselves grappling with. Complementing this narrative was the influence of the Queen Mother, who wielded her own power with a shrewdness that belied her gentle exterior, a figure adept in the slow, strategic manipulation of royal affairs, contrasting sharply with Margaret's tempestuous existence. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, emerged as a pivotal figure in the complex tapestry of British monarchy during the tumultuous 20th century. Portrayed as the nation's beloved matriarch, her image as a nurturing presence, complete with a signature wave of white curls and a disarming smile, belied the intricate power dynamics at play within the royal household. The widow of King George VI and mother to Queen Elizabeth II, she was celebrated as a symbol of royal resilience amid war, widowhood, and an evolving social landscape. However, the Queen Mother was not merely a passive observer. She was an astute political strategist, skillfully maneuvering within the halls of Windsor. Her careful cultivation of public persona during World War II, refusing to abandon Buckingham Palace during the Blitz, earned her widespread admiration and solidified her status as the embodiment of stoic endurance. Despite her apparent retirement from official roles following her husband's death in 1952, her influence endured, often underestimated by those outside the palace. Observers presumed she had stepped aside from decision-making, yet she continued to exert significant control, shaping royal marriages and key appointments well into her later life. A notable example of her political maneuvering was her long-standing animosity towards Wallis Simpson, whose marriage to Edward VII had threatened the monarchy's stability. The Queen Mother's disdain for Simpson manifested in her efforts to ensure the latter was excluded from royal engagements and titles, framing her actions as a matter of royal duty and propriety. Furthermore, she played a pivotal role in the match between her daughter and Prince Philip Mountbatten, despite initial reservations about his background. Ultimately, her acceptance followed intense diplomatic efforts within the palace, underscoring her strategic capacity. The Queen Mother's network of advisors also functioned as a form of gatekeeping for Elizabeth II, demonstrating her continued influence over royal engagements and household affairs. Politicians soon recognized that channeling their communications through her was essential for maintaining harmony with the crown. Publicly, she embodied a charming detachment from power, an affable elder attending garden parties, yet behind closed doors, her tactical acumen was unparalleled. The posthumous release of documents has illuminated the depth of her involvement in royal governance,
revealing a woman who wielded power with finesse while maintaining the facade of insignificance. Her legacy is a dual-edged sword. To some, she was an indispensable linchpin during precarious times for the monarchy, while others view her as a cunning manipulator cloaking her strategic machinations in familial affection. This duality is further complicated by her complex maternal role, particularly concerning her relationship with her daughter, suggesting that her brand of control frequently overshadowed genuine kinship, a dynamic that posed challenges for future generations within the royal lineage. Queen Mary, the wife of King George V and the mother to two kings, stands as a striking figure of early 20th century British royalty, embodying a complex blend of regality and emotional detachment. Her parenting style, characterized by a rigid formality and an absence of warmth, left an indelible mark not only on her sons but also on the very foundations of the modern monarchy. While her approach lacked overt cruelty, this is not the heart of the scandal. It instead thrived within the quieter, often unacknowledged confines of duty, decorum, and tradition. Firmly steeped in the values of service and stoicism, Queen Mary bore significant personal tragedies, including the loss of her youngest son, John, an event she never publicly acknowledged thereafter. She navigated both world wars with a stoic facade, embodying the era's expectations of grief, demands she placed firmly upon her children as well, particularly her sons. Edward VIII later expressed a profound resentment for the emotional distance of his upbringing, detailing the formality that permeated family correspondence, often merely signed with initials rather than names. This emotional detachment became painfully evident when Edward, in a controversial move, abdicated the throne in 1936, prompting a deep sense of personal betrayal from Mary. Her anguished letter, declaring her inability to ever recover from the shock, reflects the depth of her disappointment. Albert, later King George VI, faced a similarly complicated relationship with his mother. While she attempted to navigate his transformation into a more assured monarch, this support came with an expectation of conformity to royal standards, leading to further anxiety within an already insecure character. Queen Mary's maternal influence was profound, extending beyond the personal to shape the very architecture of royal motherhood through generations. She instilled a legacy that prioritized duty over emotional fulfillment, image over genuine sentiment, perpetuating a cycle that often resulted in anguish for the individuals involved. This legacy of emotional repression, rooted not in malice but in the cold practicality of royal training, left her sons struggling within a shifting world, one where emotional discourse began to gain significance over traditional stoicism. Edward fled into exile, bitter and marginalized, while George VI internalized his struggles, leading to his premature decline. The specter of Queen Mary's legacy loomed large over her grandchildren, who found themselves grappling with the burdens of an emotional inheritance that mandated endurance above expression. While historical accounts laud Queen Mary as a paragon of dignity and discipline, they often obscure the reality of a mother whose teachings encouraged her sons to conceal their emotions, fostering a monarchy firmly rooted in control rather than connection. This complex intersection of duty and emotional restraint outlined a legacy that far exceeded her own generation, setting the stage for the subsequent royal inheritors who would find that the foundations they inherited were built upon a chaotic tapestry of family secrets and historical tumult, beginning amidst the ruins of empires rather than the grandeur of their palaces. Prince Philip's formative years were characterized by profound turbulence and upheaval, an upbringing that starkly contrasted with the polished image presented to the public upon his marriage to Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Contrary to the narrative of a dependable royal consort seamlessly integrated into British society, Philip's entry into the royal family was as a survivor shaped by trauma rather than privilege. Born in 1921 to Greek and Danish royalty, he faced a shattered childhood after a military coup led to his family's exile. His father, Prince Andrew, narrowly avoided execution as his mother, Princess Alice, undertook the perilous journey of smuggling her infant son out of Greece in an orange crate aboard a British naval vessel. This dramatic escape belies the deep-seated instability that defined Philip's youth, spent amidst a backdrop of continual dislocation across France, Germany, and the UK. The early years were marked by an education in various boarding schools, including the austere Gordonstoun in Scotland, where he learned adaptability and self-reliance while burying his vulnerability. The emotional void at home was equally significant. Philip's mother was institutionalized for what was then termed nervous exhaustion, while his father pursued a life in Monte Carlo with his mistress, leaving Philip effectively parentless by the age of 10 and navigating life with little support. Philip's reticence about these personal trials became a hallmark of his public persona. He often deflected inquiries into his past with wit, yet those who knew him recognized that his character was forged through loss and a persistent sense of alienation. As he married Elizabeth, the media constructed a narrative of romantic fairy tale, a foreign prince renouncing his titles to pledge allegiance to the future queen, while his tumultuous lineage and relatives with dubious ties to Nazi Germany were carefully obscured. Beneath this crafted image, however, lay a complex individual whose early experiences of fragmentation and loss shape his famously brusque demeanor and aversion to emotional openness. Despite his decades-long commitment to the British monarchy, Philip often embodied an outsider, haunted by memories of a childhood defined by instability and neglect. His struggles for acceptance within royal circles would soon be overshadowed by another scandal, illustrating the ever-precarious nature of his royal associations, revealing the stark contrasts between his official narrative and the reality of the man behind the title. The connections of Prince Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein represent a scandalous chapter in royal history, revealing complexities and contradictions within the British monarchy. This particular saga was not merely a scandal. It marked a profound crisis that the institution struggled to address, characterized by a series of missteps, denials, and attempts to extricate itself from a disintegrating image. Central to this narrative is Andrew, Duke of York and the second son of Queen Elizabeth II, who was once heralded as the most engaging member of the royal family, a war hero and a media icon during the 1980s. However, by the 21st century, his reputation was irrevocably tarnished, largely due to the enduring implications of his association with Epstein, a convicted sex offender. Prince Andrew met Epstein in the 1990s through Ghislaine Maxwell, a socialite with ties to British aristocracy. From the onset, their friendship was contentious, given Epstein's reclusive and extravagant lifestyle, rife with allegations. Yet Andrew maintained a puzzlingly close relationship, frequently visiting Epstein's residences and featuring prominently in social settings alongside him. The turning point emerged in 2015, when Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's survivors, accused Andrew of sexual trafficking starting when she was just 17 years old, complete with detailed claims and a notable photograph of them together. Initial responses from both Andrew and the palace were marked by denial. He claimed no memory of the encounter. However, a disastrous BBC interview in 2019 compounded the crisis. In this public relations calamity, Andrew offered bizarre justifications and exhibited a shocking lack of empathy for the victims, leading to a swift and harsh public reaction that saw charities sever ties and royal duties stripped from him. By 2022, Andrew was officially deprived of all royal patronages, with unsettling rumors suggesting that the Queen herself contributed to a financially substantial settlement made in secrecy, in a suit where he did not admit guilt. This act of distancing underscored a deeper issue, the precariousness of the monarchy, which could be marred by individual transgressions, revealing the retreat as a common royal strategy in the face of crises. The ongoing narrative is not just that of one prince, but rather a reflection on the vulnerability of the institution, illustrating how swiftly reputations can devolve into liabilities, leaving behind the whispers of history that linger like shadows in the corridors of power. The long-standing affair between Camilla and Charles serves as a pivotal chapter in the annals of British monarchy, encapsulating the tension between duty and desire, public perception, and private truth. Long before she assumed the role of queen, Camilla was emblematic of royal scandal. Before he ascended as king, Charles was often ridiculed in the public eye. Their relationship, now formalized and accepted by the institution, began as an intimate love story overshadowed by aristocratic expectations and traditional norms. The spectacular yet clandestine romance first sparked in the early 1970s. Although they were contemporaries with strong social compatibility, their romance swiftly encountered insurmountable barriers. Charles, then a naval officer, faced the suffocating weight of royal protocol, while Camilla, lacking the perceived requisite purity and lineage, was rendered unworthy to become the future queen. As Camilla entered into a marriage with Andrew Parker Bowles, a well-connected officer, royal circles briefly relaxed. A perceived crisis had been averted. Yet, the bond between Charles and Camilla persisted beneath a facade of normalcy, morphing rather than ceasing. While Charles wed Lady Diana Spencer in 1981, Camilla remained a whispered yet persistent influence, with the official narrative relegating her to the role of just a friend. Diana, youthful and idealistic, harbored growing suspicions of the reality her marriage concealed. "There were always three in the marriage," she famously articulated in her poignant BBC Panorama interview. Despite the palace's efforts to control the unfolding narrative, dissuading the press from investigation and keeping Camilla out of public view, the complexities of Charles's dual existence could not remain hidden indefinitely. The early 1990s bore witness to the unraveling of this carefully crafted secrecy. The publication of Andrew Morton's provocative work, Diana, Her True Story, revealed the emotional depths of Diana's suffering as she grappled with the ongoing relationship between her husband and Camilla. This was compounded by the emergence of the Camillagate tapes, a leaked conversation that left both the monarchy and public in shock. In a bid for damage control, Charles later publicly conceded to the affair, yet only after his marriage with Diana had irreparably fractured. Camilla's phase of exit from public life was marked by her near erasure from the royal narrative, with the Queen allegedly refusing to utter her name. Ultimately, the monarchy turned against their once celebrated prince, who now stood morally questioned by a disappointed public. Years passed, along with the tragic death of Diana, before the royal family embarked on a cautious campaign to repair Camilla's image. Her official role remained understated for years. Upon her marriage to Charles in 2005, she was designated Duchess of Cornwall instead of Princess of Wales. It was only following the Queen's passing in 2022 that Camilla, amid ambiguity, was named Queen Consort. Today, the couple projects an image of unity, and their complex past is often recast with a historical lens, presented as a love that persevered against adversity. However, underneath this reimagined narrative lies a persistent truth, that the future king lived much of his life ensnared in a convoluted web of lies, a reality the monarchy diligently sought to suppress for decades. And as the public later learned, this double life was not as clandestine as it seemed, with others in the royal sphere quietly documenting the intricate truths that the facade could not long withstand. Diana's clandestine interviews and recordings reveal a profound narrative. From the announcement of her engagement to Prince Charles, she found herself ensnared in a whirlwind of public scrutiny, her identity morphing into a national fixation. Beneath the polished facade crafted by the media lay a woman engaged in a quietly audacious act, the documentation of her unvarnished reality. In the early 1990s, driven by an overwhelming sense of entrapment within a royal framework that demanded her compliance and silence, Diana began to audibly record her innermost thoughts and personal struggles. This introspective journey was spurred by the oppressive expectations placed upon her, which bore no relation to the authenticity of her experiences. Journalist Andrew Morton aided Diana in this endeavor, using her tapes to construct Diana, her true story, published in 1992. The book unleashed a seismic shift in public perception and within the royal corridors, painting Diana as profoundly unhappy, confined within a heartless system. It exposed her battles with eating disorders, emotional turmoil, suicidal thoughts, and her awareness of her husband's enduring relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. While the royal establishment vehemently refuted these claims, the narrative was too potent to suppress. Diana's essence seeped into the pages, even if her authorship was initially veiled. As the scandal unfolded, it emerged that the biography was a product of Diana's willing participation. In 1995, she further transformed the dialogue with a groundbreaking interview for the BBC's Panorama, where for the first time a member of the royal family spoke with such raw sincerity and openness. Here, she acknowledged her husband's infidelity, her own transgressions, and her struggles with mental health, all underscored by a profound sense of neglect from the institution. This interview sent ripples of concern through the palace and the populace alike, marking a watershed moment in royal communication. Although subsequent revelations indicated that the interview had been procured through manipulative means, its emotional truth resonated, forever altering the public's view of the monarchy. Following her divorce from Charles in 1996 and the loss of her royal designation, Diana's voice endured, echoing the rebellion against a tradition steeped in silence. This legacy of recorded truth lingered long past her tragic death, illustrating how genuine accounts can defy the control exerted by those in power. Diana's life, replete with contradictions, ensured that her truth could not be obscured, a rebellious act in a marriage that had devolved into a facade devoid of function. The matrimonial alliance of Charles and Diana, heralded as a fairy tale, unfolded under the weight of societal expectations and royal imperatives rather than genuine affection. The event on July 29, 1981, initially seemed to weave a romantic narrative of a perfect prince and princess, yet what transpired was a carefully orchestrated spectacle obscured by a veneer of traditional values and denial. Charles's age of 32 thrust him into the pressures of royal duty, necessitating a union with Diana, a mere 20, whose aristocratic lineage and perceived innocence rendered her a seemingly ideal match. However, the critical question of compatibility remained unaddressed, overshadowed by Charles's unresolved emotional ties to Camilla Parker Bowles. Diana's awareness of this connection manifested early in their relationship, culminating in a confrontation with Camilla before the public was cognizant of the underlying tension. Palace officials downplayed these early disagreements as mere growing pains within a royal marriage, yet they foreshadowed deeper issues. The truth lay in a stark reality. Mutual love was absent from this union, hierarchically constructed from dynastic tradition rather than emotional bond. From the inception of their honeymoon, an unmistakable chasm emerged. Diana found herself in isolation, while Charles felt both trapped and misunderstood. As the media spotlight intensified, Diana faced relentless scrutiny, dissected with a ferocity that penetrated her personal life, contrasting her emergent status as the people's princess with Charles's waning public persona. Their once harmonious public appearances devolved over time into strained performances, marked by an underlying bitterness and passive-aggressive exchanges. The ensuing years bore witness to mutual infidelities and growing discord, which became fodder for gossip that inevitably reached the press. Palace responses oscillated between denial and the perpetuation of a smile that masked their unraveling relationship. By 1992, amid the release of Diana's poignant autobiography, Prime Minister John Major formally acknowledged the couple's separation, couching the announcement in a language of mutual respect, despite the public's awareness of the crumbling facade. Their eventual divorce in 1996 found a populace that no longer speculated about the marriage demise. It had morphed from a royal union into a cautionary tale about the burdens of duty, the perils of emotional repression, and the fragility of an image crafted to portray perfection. Yet, as the public dissection raged on, the monarchy clung to appearances, confronted not just by infidelity or dysfunction, but by the more profound reality of an internal struggle, one that persisted in silence beneath the scrutinizing gaze of a captivated audience. Princess Diana's struggle with eating disorders provides a poignant lens through which to examine the complexities of her life and the rigid structures of the royal family. Over the years, observers witnessed her gradual physical decline, as she transformed into a thinner, more fragile version of herself, yet this alarming change went unacknowledged by the palace, the media, and indeed, the public. Acknowledging that the Princess of Wales suffered from bulimia would necessitate a recognition of the deeper, more unsettling truths, that the royal environment, with its sumptuous facade, could inflict profound suffering on an individual. Diana's internal battle began soon after her engagement to Prince Charles, catalyzed by the insistent pressure of life in the spotlight, the unrelenting scrutiny, and the emotional chill of palace protocols. Rather than offering support, the monarchy largely ignored her plight, reflecting a societal ignorance of eating disorders at the time. Within the walls of the palace, bulimia was not treated as a legitimate health concern but rather as a source of embarrassment. The prevailing attitude was one of dismissal. Even close family members, including Charles, purportedly viewed her struggles as mere attention-seeking behavior. Consequently, Diana navigated this harrowing experience largely alone, oscillating between her responsibilities as a public figure and the turmoil of her private life. The contradiction was striking. A woman celebrated for her poise and beauty was secretly waging a battle against her own insecurity, a body that the monarchy idealized as a paragon of perfection. Each public appearance, marked by her increasingly gaunt frame, elicited admiration rather than inquiry into her suffering. It was not until her candid 1995 Panorama interview that Diana broke the silence, declaring, "You inflict it upon yourself because your self-esteem is at a low EB and you don't think you're worthy or valuable." This brave admission forced a public confrontation with mental health issues, a topic previously shunned in royal discourse. Despite the palace's continued reticence, Diana's vulnerability endeared her even more to the public, not because she exuded perfection, but because she embodied sincerity. She was, after all, not merely a royal icon but a young woman confronting the overwhelming demands of her role, choosing to reveal her weakness in a society that expected none. However, while she illuminated aspects of her suffering, other layers of her life remained shrouded in secrecy. Her romantic entanglements, personal joys, and clandestine rebellions were facets the monarchy sought to obscure. In this complicated tapestry, not all was marked by tragedy. Some threads were simply deemed forbidden. By presenting this nuanced exploration of Diana's life, we capture the essentials of a woman navigating love, expectations, and identity in an environment precariously balanced between public adoration and private despair. Diana's clandestine relationships reveal a complex interplay between public perception and personal desire during her time in the relentless spotlight. While her image was carefully crafted by the royal establishment as that of a spurned princess, weaving a narrative of eternal heartbreak, the reality was far more nuanced. Long before her untimely death, Diana embarked on a journey of self-reinvention, transforming herself into a figure who sought love boldly and on her own terms. Her romantic entanglements, particularly in the 1990s, were characterized not by noble suitors but by ordinary men, deemed unsuitable by royal standards, which further emphasized the gulf between her lived experience and the confines of royal expectation.
One significant relationship was with Dr. Hasnat Khan, a British Pakistani heart surgeon, whose intellect and introverted nature stood in stark contrast to the public royal persona. Their bond, lasting almost 2 years, was deeply sincere, yet shrouded in secrecy and often dismissed by palace insiders. Friends later noted that Diana contemplated converting to Islam for him, demonstrating the seriousness of her feelings, though ultimately, the relationship unraveled under the immense pressure from the media and royal circles. Khan's reluctance to engage with the surrounding turmoil led him to end the liaison, leaving Diana to seek companionship once more. In the summer of 1997, she entered into a highly publicized relationship with Dodi al-Fayed, the son of a wealthy Egyptian businessman. This romance played out against the backdrop of paparazzi fervor, with images of the couple circulating widely, thus igniting debates about the authenticity of their affection. The circumstances surrounding their relationship, and its tragic end in a car accident, have since fostered numerous conspiracy theories regarding the true nature of their bond and the implications of Dodi's non-British background. In the aftermath of her death, the royal family hastily attempted to mitigate the narrative surrounding Diana, granting her a contrived sainthood that obscured the realities of her tumultuous personal life. While grief was permitted, it was to be expressed within prescribed boundaries, keeping Diana's emotional complexities and the contradictions of her choices largely out of public discourse. Rather than being treated as a normal woman navigating love in extraordinary circumstances, Diana found herself subjected to scrutiny, and her affections were often perceived as threats to royal propriety. Her love life, fraught with both beauty and difficulties, was ultimately a reflection of humanity itself, making it all the more challenging for the monarchy to reconcile with a narrative that deviated from their controlled image. Beyond the romantic escapades, the royal institution was also grappling with its financial realities, shrouded in secrecy and intricacies that would leave Diana's story in the shadows of a much greater royal enigma. Royal finances and their offshore dealings reveal a complex tapestry woven into the very fabric of the British monarchy. While often perceived as a historical and ceremonial institution, the monarchy also embodies a financial edifice, rich with inherited wealth and bolstered by taxpayer contributions alongside enigmatic private income streams. Traditionally, the nuances of royal finances have been enveloped in an air of cultivated obscurity, likened to the sovereign grant and the duchies of Cornwall and Lancaster, as well as the Crown estate. The narratives that emerged proclaimed a balanced and mutually beneficial system firmly rooted in tradition, yet this facade cracked under the weight of revelations. In 2017, the Paradise Papers leak unveiled the reality of investments amounting to millions from Queen Elizabeth II's private estate, the Duchy of Lancaster, in offshore tax havens like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. Compounding this controversy was the revelation of ties to a rent-to-own furniture company accused of exploiting economically disadvantaged British families, an irony too palpable to ignore. The royal family responded with a carefully crafted statement asserting the legality of these investments, emphasizing their execution by financial managers without the Queen's personal involvement. However, such explanations did little to assuage the growing public unease regarding the financial insulation and moral detachment of the royal family, as evidenced not by critics but by the stark numbers laid bare. This scrutiny of royal finances was not new. Public concern had been simmering for decades over the costs of maintaining the monarchy, with the sovereign grant justified as a modest expense compared to the royal household's total wealth, which includes vast properties and investments largely devoid of rigorous oversight. The Crown estate generates significant revenue that technically contributes to the Treasury while providing a fixed percentage back to the monarchy. The private estates of the duchies, however, function as obscured financial portfolios, clouded in secrecy. Yet, questioning royal finances remains a fraught endeavour, hampered by taboos, infrequent parliamentary discussions,
and journalistic inquiries often met with resistance. Freedom of information requests related to the monarchy frequently encounter blocks, creating an environment where the royal family becomes perhaps the least examined affluent institution within Britain. Why this reticence? Because the monarchy is not merely wealthy, it embodies a sacred legacy, a facet that effectively shields it from thorough audit. The revelations surrounding offshore investments transcended the realm of abstraction. They were concrete and undeniably compromising. This narrative momentarily blasted apart the myth of royal neutrality, revealing that the Queen, not just a symbolic figurehead but also a stakeholder in controversial enterprises, was implicated in matters that tarnished the monarchy's idyllic representation. While the institution itself weathered the storm unscathed, no rules broken, no resignations ensued, the implications held profound significance. They stood as a stark reminder of the concealed realities behind the royal facade, highlighting that the House of Windsor operates much like any other powerful entity, replete with veiled accounts and untouchable resources, often unwelcoming of scrutiny. Moreover, this opacity occasionally hints at deeper insecurities, such as the burdens carried by a monarch who has struggled with the prospect of succession, recalling the haunting history of figures like Queen Anne, who bore numerous children only to endure the heart-wrenching sorrow of their loss. Queen Anne, the last of the Stuarts and the inaugural sovereign of Great Britain, presided over a transformative era marked by the unification of England and Scotland amidst fierce political rivalries. Her reign was punctuated by the profound personal tragedy of losing each of her children, leading to an exploration of the complexities of her existence. Though often remembered as a pious and corpulent monarch, the historical records gloss over the extraordinary scale of her suffering. Anne's experience of motherhood was fraught with anguish, having endured at least 17 pregnancies, yet only one child, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, survived into childhood, only to perish at the tender age of 11. This dismal record of loss included numerous miscarriages and stillbirths, a narrative silenced in the public sphere where the monarchy chose to obscure the harsh realities of her reproductive difficulties. Anne's physical afflictions, possibly attributable to lupus or an autoimmune disorder, compounded her challenges, frequently rendering her immobilized by chronic illness. She was often carried in a sedan chair to Parliament because of debilitating gout and other ailments. In her private correspondence, Anne articulates not only her physical torment but also the emotional anguish tied to her role as a monarch. Each pregnancy carried with it a weighty expectation, both from the court and her nation, as the succession rested on her shoulders. Yet, where she might have found understanding, there was instead a deafening silence. The death of each royal infant passed with little recognition, as the kingdom continued forward, indifferent to her grief. When William died in 1700, it precipitated a crisis that prompted Parliament to enact the Settlement Act, ensuring a Protestant succession and redirecting the course of British history in light of Anne's empty nursery. By the time of her death in 1714, her existence was overshadowed by chronic illness, a legacy entwined with dynastic dread and the harsh reality of her perceived failure to produce a living heir, and became emblematic of the precariousness of lineage within a monarchy that held family reverence only under strict conditions, rendering her personal tragedy one of misfortune and misunderstanding. In a world where royal narratives were heavily curated, a deeper secret loomed: the unacknowledged existence of illegitimate children, products of a king's indiscretions, quietly erased from the annals of history. This juxtaposition of public expectation and private sorrow underscores the contradictions of monarchy and the human experience behind the crown. Charles I of England, often remembered for his steadfast belief in the divine right of kings, his confrontations with Parliament, and his tragic execution in 1649, remains a figure whose personal life is less scrutinized, largely by his own design. Unlike the more ostentatious members of his lineage, Charles sought to cultivate an image of a devoted husband and a devout monarch. Historically, this portrayal has largely endured, yet beneath this carefully crafted facade, an undercurrent of rumors persisted. Whispered but never substantiated, these speculations suggested the possibility of illegitimate children fathered by Charles, a narrative that the monarchy itself seemed keen to suppress. The prevailing narrative admires Charles's profound commitment to his wife, Henrietta Maria of France, a relationship marked by political tension due to her Catholic faith in a predominantly Protestant England. Still, within the corridors of power, murmurs of extramarital affairs occasionally surfaced, particularly from Charles's youth before his marriage. While there exists no definitive proof, no recognized bastards acknowledged in formal succession as would later occur with Charles II, the evidence is suggestive. Hints embedded in letters speak of unidentified wards receiving unusual monetary support, while certain noble families saw their fortunes inexplicably rise. Foreign correspondence hinted at royal offspring being raised far from home, yet the absence of any official acknowledgement on this subject within the documentation remains striking. In a society where royal mistresses and illegitimate offspring were commonplace, Charles's silence invites scrutiny. Was this silence an indicator of exceptional virtue, or a carefully curated image that erased any public trace of indiscretion? For Charles, the stakes were extraordinarily high. His kingship faced consistent challenges not just from Parliament but from zealous Protestant factions suspicious of his Catholic queen. Acknowledging an illegitimate child would have posed risks beyond mere scandal. It would have undermined the very divine right he claimed as the foundation of his rule. After his execution, his adversaries readily attacked his governance and perceived arrogance, yet the matter of potential illegitimate children remained conspicuously unaddressed, intensifying the enigma surrounding them. If such children had existed, they would have been ripe for exploitation by his political enemies. Could it be that even his most fervent opponents deemed the realm of royal personal affairs off limits to political machination? This lingering question continues to intrigue historians, not so much for its potential to alter the royal lineage, but for the insights it offers into the way the monarchy has historically shaped its own narrative. If Charles did indeed have illegitimate offspring, they posed no threat to the crown itself, but rather to the constructed mythology surrounding it. In the world of monarchy, myth often holds a value surpassing that of mere factual truth. In contrast, his successor would not enjoy such discretion. His reign would be beset by secrets that emerged not merely as whispers, but through conflicts and a hidden religious agenda that almost challenged the very foundation of the realm. James II's clandestine Catholic ambitions epitomize a recurring existential dread within the British monarchy, the spectre of Catholicism. This anxiety is entrenched not in doctrinal conflicts, but rather in questions of authority and allegiance. Historic events like the Glorious Revolution, the Gunpowder Plot, and centuries of laws favoring Protestant succession reveal a pervasive trepidation surrounding the prospect of a Catholic monarch who might reorient loyalty from the British realm to Rome. In this precarious context emerges James II, the final Catholic sovereign of England, whose fervent religious beliefs became a closely guarded secret, only to erupt into a constitutional crisis that reshaped the nation. Ascended to the throne in 1685 amidst a backdrop of tentative optimism, or perhaps, more accurately, deliberate ignorance, James had embraced Catholicism years prior. Publicly, he reassured the populace that his governance would reflect moderation and pragmatism, aiming to serve all subjects rather than the papacy alone. Yet, within the royal court, a different narrative unfolded. James discreetly orchestrated a transformation of the monarchy from within, elevating Catholics to prominent roles, easing the oppression of Catholics, and setting the stage for a potential restoration of religious authoritarianism. Supporters argued this initiative promoted tolerance,
while adversaries interpreted it as a deliberate attempt to reverse hard-won Protestant reforms, a sentiment bolstered by the king's actions. In 1687, the publication of the Declaration of Indulgence exemplified James's bold assertion of royal power. This decree effectively suspended laws penalizing Catholics and dissenting Protestants, inciting outrage among both Anglican and Puritan factions due to its circumvention of parliamentary authority. While James framed his actions as a stride toward religious freedom, Parliament viewed them with trepidation, suspecting a clandestine move to establish a theocracy. However, it was not his policies that ignited widespread alarm, but the unfolding of biological destiny. For years, James's Protestant daughters, Mary and Anne, stood as presumed heirs, offering a temporary respite from fears of a Catholic successor. This situation radically shifted in 1688 when his younger wife, Mary of Modena, presented him with a male heir, James Francis Edward Stuart. This revelation sparked baseless rumors questioning the legitimacy of the birth. Allegations of deceit and manipulation circulated, framed as tools for the political upheaval brewing against him. Within months, the Glorious Revolution began, as James's daughter Mary and her Dutch husband, William of Orange, received invitations to invade. In a swift turn of events, James fled the throne. Parliament swiftly declared it vacant, constructing a narrative that maintained James had abdicated and dismissed the legitimacy of his son, effectively quelling the perceived Catholic danger. Yet beneath this facade lay a more complex reality. James's aspiration was for quiet, gradual influence to steer England back to Catholicism, rather than a full-throttle confrontation with an entrenched Protestant establishment. His subsequent exile cast a long shadow on the political landscape. The ensuing Jacobite uprisings reflected persistent loyalty to the deposed king. His son would claim the title of the Old Pretender, and his grandson would emerge as Bonnie Prince Charlie. Nonetheless, the era of the Catholic monarchy was conclusively extinguished. The monarchy, now resolutely Protestant, committed itself to a vow of prevention against a return to Catholic rule. To cement this pledge, it engaged not only in military and legislative action but also in the erasure of uncomfortable historical truths, most notably the very existence of the warming pan baby, a symbol of turbulence deemed too contentious for memory. The controversy surrounding the birth of James Francis Edward Stuart, the son of James II and Mary of Modena, stands as one of history's most intriguing cases of political machinations and public skepticism. Officially heralded as a male heir born to a king after prolonged infertility, his arrival on June 10, 1688, was intended to cement a Catholic legacy amidst a politically charged environment. Yet, to the English political elite, he was to be perceived through a very different lens, a potential usurper and a fabricated crisis. The seeds of suspicion were sown immediately after his birth. Mary of Modena had withdrawn from public scrutiny during the latter part of her pregnancy, and the labour was reportedly attended by an unusually high number of Catholic witnesses, elements that fueled skepticism. Most compelling of all were claims that the Queen was not visibly pregnant during the final weeks leading up to the delivery. Almost instantaneously, a conspiracy theory took root. Some posited that the infant was smuggled into the royal chamber in a warming pan, a device traditionally used to heat beds, rather than being born of legitimate kin. This narrative was laden with implications. James II's perceived need for a Catholic heir arose from the existential dread of losing the throne to the Protestant establishment, exacerbated by his daughter Mary's Protestant union with William of Orange. Hence, the warming pan theory transcended mere rumour. It became a potent tool in the political arsenal, leveraged against the monarchy. Pamphlets circulated widely, poking fun at the royal family, and prominent Protestant nobles clamoured for probes into the birth's legitimacy. Despite an official inquiry that affirmed the birth's authenticity,
the fiction had taken root in the public consciousness. The implications of this narrative were profound. A true Catholic heir presented the alarming prospect of a Catholic dynasty. Conversely, questioning the legitimacy of the child provided both legal justification for James II's removal and a rallying point for dissent against a monarch viewed as increasingly unfit. The Glorious Revolution, in its pursuit of legitimate governance, found fertile ground in the Warming Pan tale, a scandalous story that evoked visual imagery and outrage, yet remained ultimately unprovable. As James II fled to France and William and Mary ascended to the throne, the myth persisted. James Francis grew up in exile, often referred to as the Old Pretender, his claims to legitimacy continually marred by the shadow of the dubious circumstances surrounding his birth. The monarchy, for its part, neither retracted nor repudiated the narrative, having successfully used it to its advantage. The tale of the Warming Pan became an embedded narrative in British history, a family scandal spun into a national myth. Scholars to this day debate whether it was grounded in reality or an example of masterful political propaganda. What remains uncontested is the stark truth that when power is at jeopardy, even a child can become a pivotal threat. At times, the truth is the first casualty, concealed beneath layers of intrigue. Amidst this cradle of controversy, another clandestine narrative emerged. Letters encoded by a queen, deeply betrayed and ultimately executed. The significant implications of these missives would remain obscured for centuries, intertwining themes of power, legitimacy, and the complexities of royal life against a backdrop of political turmoil. Mary, Queen of Scots, embodies a complex figure in the annals of history, a Catholic sovereign navigating the treacherous waters of a Protestant England, a victim of royal intrigue, and ultimately, an emblem of martyrdom. Yet, her most significant identity may very well be that of a writer, whose pen never ceased to produce correspondence, appeals, and political discourse, even during her house arrest. For the final 18 years of her life, she was confined by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, who perceived Mary as a legitimate threat to her reign, particularly among the Catholic populace. While her physical freedom was stripped away, Mary's intellect and resolve flourished within the confines of her imprisonment. Despite her constraints, Mary remained active in plotting her escape and maintaining alliances. She exchanged a multitude of letters with supporters across Europe, including factions in France and Spain. Many of these correspondences were meticulously coded, employing various encryptions designed to thwart surveillance. Some used substitution codes, while others incorporated cipher alphabets and intricate layouts intended to confound any potential decipherers. The most notorious of these communications were tied to the Babington Plot, an audacious conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. This plan was particularly ill-fated, as Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had infiltrated Mary's communication network, leading to the interception and decoding of her letters, which ultimately served as damning evidence in her treason trial. However, not all of Mary's cryptographic messages were deciphered during her time. Many lay dormant, misattributed, or misplaced in European libraries for centuries. Remarkably, in 2023, researchers harnessing artificial intelligence and cryptographic techniques unearthed over 50 previously overlooked coded letters by Mary, buried within the archives of the French National Library. These documents had not seen the light of day for centuries, hidden beneath labels that obscured their historical significance. The process of decoding these letters was labor-intensive, requiring the creation of a cipher key through the analysis of recurring patterns and linguistic nuances. Once translated, these communications unveiled fresh perspectives on Mary's psyche, revealing her skepticism toward her captors, her diplomatic tactics, her anxieties regarding her son James,
and her strategic emotional engagement as she endeavored to navigate her captivity while preserving her claim to the throne. What emerged from these letters was not the plaintive cry of a dethroned monarch, but rather a politically astute narrative from a woman determined to assert her presence. Mary's writings displayed not only profound intelligence and resilience but also foresight, as they seemed to articulate a plan that extended beyond her immediate survival. Her struggle was not merely for her life but for a legacy that would endure long after her death. Even her execution in 1587, shrouded in theatrical severity, failed to obliterate the mythos surrounding her. If anything, it solidified it. Centuries later, her voice continues to resonate, as scholars delve into her words, deciphering her defiance against oppressive circumstances and admiring the articulate manner in which she articulated her plight. In contrast to Mary's storied correspondence lies the silent suffering of another sovereign, whose grief was veiled and whose experiences are often overlooked. This queen, shrouded in black and bound by the conventions of prolonged mourning, communicated not through letters but through a poignant absence of words. Her pain, unlike Mary's, was marked by conspicuous silence, a reflection of a different kind of confinement that speaks volumes about the complexities faced by women of power in a male-dominated political landscape. Queen Victoria's profound depression marked a pivotal yet often overlooked aspect of her reign. To the public eye, she was a grieving widow, clad in black, embodying a monarch's duty while mourning the death of her cherished Prince Albert, whose loss struck at the heart of her emotional resilience. Nonetheless, her sorrow belied a deeper unraveling, as she bore the burden of unresolved grief that became a silent struggle throughout her life. Victoria's relationship with Albert was characterized by considerable affection and intellectual companionship, but it also faced strains. His premature death in 1861 at the age of 42 sent her into a genuine psychological crisis, one that overshadowed her remaining years. Initially, her grief was a natural articulation of love lost. Yet, this bereavement gradually morphed into a ritualistic absence from the public sphere, transforming Victoria into a ruler of absence rather than presence. She largely withdrew from her royal duties, refusing to participate in the state openings of Parliament, while court life stagnated. Retreating to secluded residences such as Balmoral and Osborne House, she evaded public scrutiny and the responsibilities of her position as monarch. This behaviour bemused her ministers and unsettled the public, who mockingly dubbed her the Widow of Windsor. Yet, the term depression went unspoken in a society that viewed mental health issues in royalty through an ambiguous lens, known elsewhere as madness in the case of George III, or reframed in the noble vernacular of grief. Victoria's private correspondence unveils a stark contrast to her public persona. Within her letters and diaries, she revealed profound emotions of despair, guilt, and a sense of paralysis that rendered her unable to engage with the world around her. She longed for death and envisioned a bleak future without the companion she had cherished. Despite the concern from those around her, seeking to coax her back into her role, Victoria remained resolute in her withdrawal. Her embrace of spiritualism and senses, alongside an unwavering devotion to Albert's memory, marked her years of mourning. She donned black attire for 4 decades and preserved his belongings with almost reverential care. A glass of water remained at his bedside each night as if to sustain his presence in a world that had moved on. The monarchy, while tolerating this domestic dysfunction, understood the necessity of managing her public image, which, paradoxically, became intertwined with Victorian virtue. Victoria, the pious queen steadfast in her mourning, occupied a complicated duality within the public consciousness. Over time, as the British Empire expanded and statues honouring her were erected, Victoria became an enduring symbol of strength despite her personal struggles. Underneath the emblematic exterior lay a woman whose grief shadowed her reign, a poignant reminder that even the most influential historical figures are susceptible to profound despair. Moreover, within the intricacies of her sorrow emerged a notable figure, not a successor or heir, but a devoted servant. This individual would become the center of speculation, gossip, and perhaps an emotional connection that transcended royal boundaries, understanding her not merely as a queen, but as a fundamentally human woman confronting her profound loss against the backdrop of an expansive empire. Queen Victoria's complex relationship with John Brown presents a remarkable narrative that transcends the rigid expectations of her royal status. Official depictions often cast her in solitary mourning, a figure clad in black and bound by grief for her late husband, Prince Albert. However, beneath this facade, an alternative narrative unfolds, a narrative enriched by the presence of John Brown, a Highland servant whose gruff demeanour and unswerving loyalty rendered him an indispensable figure in Victoria's life following Albert's death. The loss plunged Victoria into profound sorrow, driving her to a retreat from public duties and a fixation on mourning rituals. In this context of isolation, Brown emerged as a significant, albeit unofficial, figure in her daily life. Initially a gillie who had assisted during the royal family's stays at Balmoral, he offered her a rare blend of candidness and steadfast support, qualities she found increasingly lacking among her court and family. Their relationship was marked by a rapid and deepening intimacy. Brown became her personal attendant and confidant, accompanying her during royal engagements, meals, and even in moments of solitude. His familiar interactions often brushed aside the hierarchies of court etiquette, eliciting both charm and horror within royal circles. Notably, Victoria's children, particularly her future heir, Edward VII, resented Brown's influence, while courtiers conveyed their discontent through whispers and derogatory titles, such as the Queen's Stallion. Despite the extensive speculation surrounding their bond, ranging from platonic affection to romantic intrigue, no conclusive evidence ever emerged. Victoria's own writings, though suffused with affection and admiration, were carefully concealed from public scrutiny. Following Brown's death in 1883, the palace moved swiftly to erase his presence. His personal belongings were removed, letters discarded, and records of their relationship significantly modified, primarily under the editorial hand of Princess Beatrice. Even as the monarchy sought to distance itself from any semblance of scandal, remnants of their relationship persisted. A bronze statue of Brown at Balmoral, a tribute from Victoria, indicated that his significance was not easily forgotten, though this very memorial was later obscured from public view. The lingering question remains: was John Brown merely a devoted companion, a caretaker, or something more profound? In a realm governed by duty and decorum, his connection with the Queen disrupted the established norms, creating a private sanctuary amidst the rigidities of royal life. Victoria's uncharacteristic responsiveness to Brown's presence foreshadowed a similar defiance found in her son, who, unlike his mother, did not cloak his indulgences but rather transformed them into a matter of public spectacle, leaving behind the most indiscreet traces of his pleasures in the vibrant landscape of London society. Before ascending to the throne, Edward VII, affectionately dubbed Bertie, became an emblematic figure of both fascination and concern amidst the Victorian elite. His mother, Queen Victoria, enveloped in perpetual mourning, cast a shadow that Edward defiantly turned his back on. As the Prince of Wales, he embraced life with exuberance, indulging in pleasures of the flesh, wine, and games of chance, all while becoming notoriously well acquainted with a multitude of mistresses. However, his escapades extended beyond the courtly nuances of high society into the lavish realms of Parisian brothels, particularly Le Chabinet, a notorious establishment renowned for its clientele of the political and artistic elite. Edward's frequent visits were not merely episodes of high intrigue but an open secret within both British and French circles, to such an extent that the boundaries of confidentiality blurred into public knowledge. Among these indulgences, Edward even had a specially designed chair for his lush experiences, an artifact that eventually became a museum piece, emblematic of both his excesses and his status. His pursuits raised profound questions about royal propriety and authority. The prince unabashedly indulged in vices with complete immunity, operating under the protective veil of his aristocratic status. The British press, bound by a tacit agreement of discretion, remained largely silent on these matters, with courtiers and aides diligently managing the whispers that lingered around his escapades. Despite the whispers and sensationalist interpretations by the French press, Edward's reign, though short-lived, was not marked by the anticipated chaos. On the contrary, he orchestrated a transformation of the royal image, shifting from the somber ethos of his mother's rule to a monarchy characterized by sociability and modernity. The Edwardian era would later be romanticized, celebrated for its grace and charm, yet its foundation was built upon a selective dismissal of past indiscretions. The clandestine nature of his brothel visits was never publicly acknowledged, relegated to the shadows, thereby preserving the delicate fabric of the royal narrative. Within the high-stakes domain of monarchy, the art of discretion was not merely a matter of choice. It was, fundamentally, an essential means of survival. Edward's personal life, with all its contradictions, thus wove itself into the tapestry of royal history, a tapestry where some secrets linger, while others take on an enduring legacy that echoes through generations. In an era when royal intrigues were typically veiled in secrecy and relegated to hushed conversations within exclusive circles, the affair between Edward VII and Alice Kiel stands out as a remarkable exception. Unlike other illicit relationships of the time, this was neither denied nor concealed. Rather, it was accepted and, in many instances, welcomed within the corridors of power. During the late Victorian and Edwardian periods, societal expectations prioritized public appearances over private conduct, and Alice Kiel adept navigated this intricate landscape. As the mistress of the future king, she became not only a well-known figure in British society but also a carefully managed open secret. Alice's allure for Edward was multifaceted. She was charming, discreet, keenly intelligent, and intriguingly, she was married. This marital status enabled her to partake in royal events with a degree of discretion that might have been impossible otherwise. Her husband, George Kiel, was complicit, tolerating and even promoting the affair, recognizing the considerable advantages that arose from their connection to the Prince of Wales. Their liaison, which took root in the 1890s, blossomed for over a decade, culminating in her presence at Edward's side during his final days in 1910, a testament to her status as more than just a mistress, but a steadfast companion. Kiel's success in the royal court derived largely from her keen political acumen. She not only entertained the king, she provided counsel, soothed his frailties, and expertly navigated the complexities of court etiquette. Alice's skill in offering flattery without subservience, knowing when to retain her distance, and maintaining her relevance made her indispensable. This relationship transcended mere romantic entanglement. It was a matter of possessing influence, an art practiced through whispered dialogues, intimate dinners, and a careful grasp of courtly intrigues. The nobility and ministers alike recognized Alice's pivotal role, treating her with an implied respect stemming from her closeness to the king. Despite this de facto acknowledgement, Alice's presence was never formally sanctioned. She lacked titles, legal recognition, or any formal mention in government documents. Her significance was one that existed in the shadows, elegantly woven into the fabric of a monarchy that preferred to keep its more scandalous affairs discreet. Ironically, her legacy would extend beyond Edward's reign, with her great-granddaughter, Camilla Parker Bowles, now known as Queen Camilla, embodying the continuation of the royal mistress to consort narrative,
a compelling reminder of history's penchant for repetition among its monarchs and their intimate companions. However, while Edward's reign was characterized by charming escapades and societal flamboyance, the subsequent royal generation would confront a starkly different environment. George V, devoid of the indulgent nature of his predecessor, embodied a harsher paternal style marked by rigor rather than leniency. He eschewed romantic attachments and nocturnal revelries in favor of instilling obedience within his sons, often with brutal consequences. Thus, the legacy of affection that marked Edward's personal life would contrast sharply with George's austere discipline, shaping a royal lineage irrevocably marked by the complexities of power and the personal sacrifices it exacted. The legacy of George V is often encapsulated in a portrayal of unwavering tradition, a monarch characterized by his stiff collars, military mannerism, and an unrelenting dedication to duty. However, beneath this stoic facade lay a paternal disposition that was, at best, reminiscent of a naval commander rather than nurturing parental guidance. The ramifications of his strict approach to fatherhood reverberated through 3 subsequent generations of royalty. George V fathered 6 children, yet his emphasis was predominantly placed upon his eldest sons, Edward and Albert, both of whom would emerge from their father's cold leadership as deeply flawed figures. Edward, destined to be king yet ultimately known for his abdication, and Albert, who would ascend the throne as George VI, were deprived of essential emotional support early in life. Instead, they were subjected to a rigid upbringing, grounded in George's principles of discipline, hierarchy, and control, which he deemed imperative for successful royal governance. Emotional warmth, in his view, was an extravagance fraught with peril. His foreboding remarks regarding Edward, asserting that his son would ruin himself shortly following George's death, foreshadowed a troubling reality that unfolded just shy of 1 year later. George's disdain for his sons manifested in overt criticism. Poor Edward faced relentless reproach for his perceived frivolity, while Albert became the target of George's impatience, particularly regarding his speech impediment. The king's misunderstanding of introversion as weakness led him to impose stringent punishments on both boys, ultimately distorting their emotional development. The consequences of such a harsh upbringing were pronounced. Edward emerged as a charismatic yet emotionally distant figure, viewing both his royal responsibilities and personal relationships through a performative lens rather than one rooted in authentic connection. When he fell for Wallace Simpson, a twice-divorced American, he saw an opportunity for liberation rather than the scandal his family feared. Conversely, Albert internalized his father's disapproval, grappling with a debilitating stammer and heightened anxiety, which would gnaw at him throughout his subsequent reign as king, transitioning into George VI almost by default after Edward's abdication. The impact of George V's rigid authority extended further to his younger children. Prince John, the youngest, faced his own stark realities, suffering from epilepsy and born into secrecy until his tragic death, effectively rendered more a concealed presence than a cherished son. George's aloof response to his youngest child's struggle serves as a reflection of his emotional distance, a demeanor consistent with his reign where affection was subordinate to duty. Contemporary historians often scrutinize George V's parenting through a lens of emotional neglect, highlighting the potential psychological trauma inflicted upon his children. Yet, in his own era, such parenting was viewed as noble. A monarch's detachment was a way to embody royal responsibilities, and parents were expected to mold rather than nurture their offspring. George's fixation on discipline bred not successors, but individuals burdened with anxiety and a warped perception of duty as a burden rather than a privilege. Thus, the royal family found itself ensnared in a legacy of trauma, one not rooted in palpable scandals or geopolitical intrigues, but rather emanating from a chill of paternal indifference echoing through the palace corridors, the unyielding reminder that affection was not part of the sovereign's mantle. Tragically,
When Edward assumed the throne, he did not rebel against his circumstances but deteriorated under the weight of them, ultimately wreaking havoc not only on his reign but also on the very essence of monarchy itself. Edward VII's demeanour towards his staff reveals profound complexities in his character, making him a pivotal yet paradoxical figure within the British monarchy. Although historical narratives tend to place significant emphasis on his infamous romantic involvement with Wallis Simpson and subsequent abdication, these events merely served as surface displays, the flamboyant fireworks, if you will, that obscured a deeper, more troubling reality. Beneath the polished exterior of the charming prince lay a disquieting cruelty, particularly directed toward those deemed lesser, highlighting an instinctive disdain for those in servitude. Within the confines of palace life, Edward garnered a reputation for his volatile temperament, which transcended mere royal entitlement. His charm, expertly deployed towards the public and diplomats, contrasted sharply with the dismissive cruelty he exhibited towards his aides and staff. A telling anecdote reveals that Edward insisted upon absolute silence from his personal servants, imperiously demanding that they not utter a word, even while tending to his needs. A mere cough from a valet could lead to dismissal, while a footman's accidental eye contact might result in reassignment. This unspoken code of silence and compliance reflected a tangled web of ego and power dynamics, dictating interactions and expectations without formal acknowledgement. Edward's indulgence of his pets added another layer of irony to his character. He permitted his dogs to roam freely through the palace, yet held his staff in strict liability should the animals err. This expectation of faultless service without explicit guidance revealed a king whose concept of authority leaned heavily on control rather than partnership, creating an atmosphere fraught with tension and unrecognized obligation. Surprisingly, these dynamics remained largely hidden from public scrutiny, as the monarchy adept cultivated a culture of silence. Staff members refrained from sharing their experiences, diaries went unpublished, and misbehavior was consistently shrouded in the ceremonial duties of royalty. It was only after Edward's abdication that the facade began to crumble, as former aides and insiders offered accounts that painted a distinctly different portrait from the tragic romantic he sought to embody. The emerging stories stripped away the romantic veneer, unveiling a man whose conflation of superiority with dismissiveness and charm with coerciveness was deeply damaging. His tenure was not marked by a failure to navigate love, but by a fundamental misunderstanding of the responsibilities of the crown, whereby the virtues of discipline and service were sacrificed for self-reflection and admiration. In stepping away from the throne, Edward not only left a constitutional crisis in his wake but also left behind a trail of strained relationships and forgotten staff who had no choice but to witness a private reality starkly divergent from the idealized image projected to the nation. Even as the monarchy transitioned to new leadership, the fractures caused by Edward's reign did not vanish. Rather, they followed the lineage to a new generation, where even the seemingly unassailable queen would find herself grappling with the remnants of that internal chaos. Queen Elizabeth II's reign, perceived externally as a bastion of stability amidst global turmoil, belied a tumultuous reality within her family. While she projected an image of calm and steadfastness through numerous crises, including wars and cultural revolutions, her internal world was anything but tranquil. The royal family, often referred to as the firm, was perhaps more accurately characterized as an organizational challenge bedecked in finery. Elizabeth's public demeanor embodied a commitment to duty, yet her private life was riddled with discord, emotional detachment, and lingering resentment, complexities exacerbated by generational challenges. Raised in an era where emotional expression was often considered an excess, she prioritized duty over affection, thus creating an atmosphere where vulnerability was viewed as a weakness. The burdens of maintaining an institution that served as both a national symbol and a disjointed family unit weighed heavily on her. Her marriage to Prince Philip,
while outwardly strong, was fraught with disagreement, particularly regarding their children's upbringing. Philip favored toughness, while Elizabeth held tradition in high esteem. Both eschewed emotional openness. Consequently, their 4 children were often raised more by household staff and established protocols than by genuine familial bonds, a circumstance that notably impacted Prince Charles. Struggling with isolation, he endured bullying during his boarding school years and faced a strained relationship with his parents, as they perceived him as overly sensitive or emotionally distant, a legacy of their own detachment that affected his subsequent marital challenges. Princess Anne's approach was marked by pragmatism, largely evading family drama, whereas Prince Andrew would later navigate his own tumultuous issues, characterized early on by entitlement and a troubling disregard for personal accountability. Even the youngest sibling, Prince Edward, grappled with his identity amidst the expectations of royal life. Within the palace, unresolved tensions festered, with public appearances masking personal turmoil. Emotional crises were presented as mere press fatigue, while scandals and divorces were met with strategic silence to shift public focus. Amidst this facade of stability, cracks in the royal edifice became increasingly apparent, particularly in the 1990s, a period marked by Elizabeth's own assessment as her annus horribilis. During this tumult, the family endured a series of public disasters, including the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage and the media scrutiny besieging Sarah Ferguson, culminating in Windsor Castle's fire, which prompted a notable shift in public perception. The once unassailable moral authority of the monarchy appeared to some as an extravagant spectacle of dysfunction. Yet, in true Elizabethan style, she continued to endure, not by rectifying the family's issues but by mastering the art of regal endurance, maintaining an unwavering front as chaos swirled beneath. The emotional costs of such denial rippled through the family, tragically manifesting not in public scrutiny but in the shadows of royal life, where certain members were metaphorically and literally obscured from a narrative, their existence deemed so inconvenient that they were recorded as dead while still very much alive. Princess Alice of Battenberg's life represents a compelling, yet often overlooked chapter in the royal narrative, particularly when one considers her connection to Queen Elizabeth II through her husband, Prince Philip. Born in Windsor Castle in 1885 as a great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria, Alice was afflicted with deafness, a condition she overcame through self-taught speech and lip-reading in multiple languages. Her marriage to Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark produced 5 children, one of whom would assume a pivotal role in British history as the consort to Queen Elizabeth II. However, Alice's story diverges from the conventional expectations of royal legacy, especially after the upheavals in Greece during the early 1920s compelled her family into exile. The challenges she faced were compounded by spiritual fervor and personal stress, which manifested in behaviors that defied societal norms of the time. Diagnosed with schizophrenia by prominent physicians, including the controversial Sigmund Freud, Alice's condition led to her institutionalization in a Swiss sanatorium, a decision shrouded in the stigma of her illness and the royal family's apprehension about public perception. Her separation from her son Philip, who was only 9 years old at the time, rendered him deprived of maternal support during formative years, effectively erasing Alice from significant family events. Confinement did not extinguish her spirit, as Alice later underwent a profound personal renaissance during the 1940s. She made notable contributions by establishing a Greek Orthodox nursing order and notably sheltering a Jewish family during the Nazi occupation of Greece, a courageous act that earned her recognition as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem in Israel. After decades in relative obscurity, Alice returned to her royal roots late in life, moving back to Buckingham Palace in 1967 amid declining health. Upon her death 2 years later, her funeral reflected a subdued royal presence, fulfilling her wish to be buried in Jerusalem, a desire that would take decades to realize officially. Despite her remarkable journey through adversity, exile, and ultimately redemption, her legacy remains curiously muted within official royal histories. Alice embodies the complexities of royal life, marked by societal taboos surrounding mental health and the ways in which difficult narratives are often marginalized. Her existence serves as a reminder that even within the grandeur of monarchy, the crown adept navigates discomfort, at times erasing those lives that do not conform neatly to its established ideals. Thus, Alice's life, much like the challenges faced by others within the royal sphere, reflects the intricate balance of public perception and personal reality, a testament to the nuanced stories that often lie beneath the surface of history. Queen Alexandra's significant hearing impairment remained an unspoken reality throughout her life, concealed behind the elegant facade of her royal image. As the consort of Edward VII and the mother of George V, she was often depicted in serene portraits that conveyed regal composure and charm. Yet, beyond the luxurious fabrics and glittering jewels lay a personal struggle that profoundly impacted her existence and fostered a sense of isolation at court. Her progressive deafness was never openly acknowledged. Historically, the monarchy has propagated an ideal of queens unfazed by physical limitations. Silence became veiled as dignified restraint. Marrying Edward in 1863, Alexandra emerged as a figure of youth and beauty, quickly winning public adoration. However, in her early 30s, hereditary otosclerosis led to a debilitating loss of hearing. The ramifications of this condition were severe, particularly within the context of courtly life, which thrived on nuanced communication and political maneuvering conducted through whispers and discreet conversation. Alexandra found herself increasingly incapable of participating in these vital exchanges and resorted to a semblance of silence as a means of coping, nodding, smiling politely, and engaging only minimally when addressed. Over time, her once vibrant presence morphed into an almost spectral one at official events. Admirers praised her poise, but behind the scenes lay a narrative of frustration and solitude. The royal household opted for silence regarding her condition, opting instead to depict her as a queen of inscrutable dignity. Acknowledging her impairment would humanize her in a way the monarchy was reluctant to do. Thus, her struggles remained obscured, transmuted into an enigmatic royal reserve. Correspondence from Alexandra reveals deep-seated frustrations stemming from her inability to connect meaningfully with family or carry out royal duties. Public social gatherings became cumbersome trials, and her marriage suffered for it, as Edward, far from understanding, grew increasingly unfaithful, leaving her to seek solace in charitable endeavors. Her deafness unfolded as not merely a physical obstacle but a chasm in her marital relationship. Despite these challenges, Alexandra carved a significant legacy, influencing fashion trends and establishing hospitals while retaining a devoted public following. Yet, her deafness noted no mention in official records until much later, reflecting the monarchy's broader inclination to gloss over vulnerabilities rather than confront them. Such tendencies hark back to earlier monarchs, illustrating a long-standing historical pattern wherein personal affliction was shrouded in silence, further complicating the narrative of queenship and their multifaceted roles in a world deeply marred by expectations and the weight of public perception. 46. The complexities of Henry VIII's impotence and reproductive challenges form one of the most analyzed narratives in English history, centering on his 6 wives. This tale, rife with beheadings, political intrigue, and accusations of betrayal, often plays out like a historical drama steeped in scandal. Yet beneath this sensational surface lies a more subtle, persistent truth that the monarchy consistently sidestepped: the notion that the monarch himself might have been the source of his reproductive troubles. Among Henry's 6 spouses, only Jane Seymour bore him a surviving male heir, Edward VI, who was frail and deceased at a young age.
The other marriages besieged by miscarriages and stillbirths resulted in a narrative that cast blame overwhelmingly on the women involved. Catherine of Aragon was labelled too aged, and Boleyn deemed an enchantress, and Anne of Cleves characterized as unappealing. Catherine Howard faced accusations of promiscuity. Each wife became a scapegoat for Henry's perceived failures, while the king's health issues were effectively silenced and neglected. Emerging historical evidence indicates that Henry VIII's medical condition was potentially pivotal in his failure to produce heirs. By his late 30s, he exhibited chronic ailments, including erratic mood swings, fatigue, and obesity, alongside a debilitating leg wound from a jousting incident that evolved into a lingering infection. Furthermore, indications of hormonal irregularities raised questions about his overall vitality, suggesting health maladies akin to those that impair fertility and sexual performance today. Witnesses at court and foreign dignitaries noted this shift in his demeanor, transitioning from the vigorous ruler he once was to someone increasingly irritable and withdrawn. Rumors surrounding his diminishing potency circulated, hinting at a deeper communal anxiety regarding his inability to secure a male successor. In an era where the king's physique symbolized national fortitude, speculation about his failing body was unacceptable and could imply divine condemnation or challenge the legitimacy of his reign. Consequently, the fault was transferred to his wives, with Anne Boleyn tragically portrayed as a seductress who attempted to beguile Henry and was executed for her inability to produce a son. The tragically ironic scapegoating of Boleyn exemplifies the flawed narrative that overshadowed the true source of the reproductive crises at court. Contemporaries, aware that something was amiss, observed that court physicians deftly avoided confronting Henry's fertility struggles directly, instead opting to address superficial symptoms while neglecting underlying causes. They permitted a dissonance between the myth of the king's virility and the sobering reality of his health. Ultimately, despite reshaping England's religious and political landscapes, Henry failed to confront the undeniable truth that his own condition may well have been at the heart of his dynastic turmoil. Instead of addressing this uncomfortable reality, the monarchy chose to divert blame to his wives. Ironically, as scandal persisted, it was women's bodies subjected to scrutiny in the following generation. The legacy of Anne Boleyn herself became tarnished by unfounded rumors of physical deformities, deepening the historical injustices that surrounded her story. Anne Boleyn, a woman whose fate hangs heavily in the annals of history, represents a striking case of how narrative can overshadow reality. Following her execution, the monarchy sought to erase her from memory not merely as a queen but also as an individual, replacing her humanity with a blend of myth and rumor. Over the centuries, and has been transformed into a spectral figure, one conjured as the seductress, the witch, and the usurper. Such characterizations came accompanied by a bizarre catalogue of supposed physical deformities, most notably the legend of her having 6 fingers. This myth varied widely in its details, from a mere extra nail to a full additional digit, compounded by tales of a 3rd nipple or an odd mole, an allusion to her alleged consort with the devil. This diffusion of folklore was not merely idle chatter within the superstitions of Tudor society. It served deeper moral implications. Yet, not a shred of reliable contemporary evidence substantiates these claims of physical oddity. Descriptions from ambassadors and courtiers who encountered and during her life portray her as elegant, fashionable, and alluring, not as a figure of grotesqueness. These malicious narratives took root posthumously, retrospectively nice detailing her demise. In the 16th and 17th centuries, society began to equate physical anomaly with moral failing, often portraying such characteristics as visible manifestations of hidden sins. And, having deposed Catherine of Aragon and igniting a religious upheaval while failing to bear a male successor, became an ideal target for demonization. The portrayal of her as physically unnatural neatly fit within the narratives of the Protestant Catholic discord. Catholic authors depicted her as a cunning seductress, while Protestant historians later encountered the challenge of reclaiming her as a martyr. However, the stigma of deformity proved too rigorous, embedding itself within portraits, literature, and speculative history for many generations. Meanwhile, the monarchy willingly allowed such rumors to persist. Anne Boleyn's downfall marked a critical juncture for the Tudor dynasty, underscoring the native peril that even monarchs faced under royal displeasure. Her alleged deformities provided a veneer of morality over what was, in truth, a politically motivated execution. Thus, she transformed into less of a tragic figure and more of a cautionary spectre, representing the consequences of treason. Ultimately, Anne Boleyn's real transgression was not rooted in physicality but in her political engagement, masterfully maneuvering against a sitting queen, captivating a king, and ultimately failing to secure the male heir required to ensure her legacy. Consequently, she became subject to the reshaping of her image through whispered legends, emerging as a grotesque creation of rumor. This leaves us pondering the beginnings of such tales. Oftentimes, they do not originate from mere gossip but arise from the silence that shrouds personal histories. From this silence, the truth buried in obscurity eventually comes to light, much like the next queen whose secrets, shrouded in private correspondence, would ultimately lead to her undoing at the hands of a court eager to exploit them. Catherine Howard's entangled past reveals much about the socio-political dynamics of the Tudor court. As the fifth wife of Henry VIII, Catherine entered the royal palace imbued with a youthful charm that starkly contrasted with Henry's waning vitality in his 50s, marked by years of tumultuous political and marital experiences. To the aging monarch, Catherine appeared as a pure, unblemished flower amidst the thorns of his previous disappointments. However, her history was far from the virginal purity he sought. It indeed harbored complexities that were ultimately her undoing. Raised under the watchful eye of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine grew up in a household characterized by lax moral supervision, wherein her early teenage years saw her become romantically entangled first with her music tutor, Henry Manx, and then with Francis Darham, a young nobleman. Contrary to a mere dalliance, these relationships were genuine, fraught with emotional and physical intimacy, becoming common knowledge among their peers. Viewed through a contemporary lens, her actions could be interpreted as typical adolescent indiscretions exacerbated by a lack of guidance and societal constraints. Yet, within the Tudor court, such behavior was deemed dangerously immoral. Upon marrying Henry in 1540, Catherine concealed these previous associations, perhaps driven by fear, stigma, or survival instinct, presenting herself as a chastened virgin. For Henry, emerging from the upheaval of Anne Boleyn's downfall and the calculated marriage to Jane Seymour, Catherine embodied the romantic ideals he craved. However, the insatiable thirst for knowledge and gossip within the court soon led to the unraveling of this facade. Just over a year into their union, whispers began circulating, fueled by former friends and servants eager to divulge her past. The situation escalated when Darham was coerced into confessing his earlier liaison with her, and accusations against another courtier, Thomas Culpeper, surfaced, further tainting Catherine's reputation. The monarchy's reaction was predictably swift. Both Darham and Culpeper met execution, while Catherine faced a more insidious fate. Though she initially denied her earlier entanglements, her subsequent admission to her relationship with Darham marked her as a figure of scandal. The court failed to acknowledge the nuances of her youth, framing her previous actions as calculated treachery against the ideals of a perfect queen. Paradoxically, it seems the court had likely been aware of her past, yet chose to overlook it as long as her performance satisfied the king's desires. Tragically, once the initial allure waned and political circumstances shifted,
the whispers transformed into damning evidence against her. Catherine Howard did not perish merely due to her youthful indiscretions, but because the truth she harbored became politically inconvenient. In retrospect, this episode serves as a reminder of the precarious balance between personal authenticity and the expectations placed upon women in positions of power, laying bare the dangers that unfold when those expectations are not met. Compounding the intrigue of Tudor scandals, one must ponder the next queen whose circumstances would further manipulate the narratives of courtly life. An absence cloaked in the illusion of miraculous expectation would soon grace the annals of the monarchy, leading to a different form of controversy altogether. Mary I of England, often remembered by the disparaging moniker Bloody Mary, presided over a tumultuous 5-year reign marked by fervent religious conviction, political instability, and an all-consuming personal yearning for an heir. This longing transcended mere disappointment. It manifested as a profound crisis of faith, identity, and legitimacy, which ultimately led to a poignant, albeit seldom acknowledged, medical enigma in royal history, her phantom pregnancies. Following her marriage to Philip of Spain in 1554, Mary proclaimed she was expecting a child. The court celebrated vigorously. A Catholic heir signified the potential continuation of the Tudor lineage under papal authority, poised to undo the Protestant reforms initiated by her father, Henry VIII. Mary withdrew from the public eye, preparing for motherhood, as a nursery was set up and festivities were organized. Yet, as time passed, the anticipated birth never materialized. Despite displaying physical symptoms of pregnancy, nausea, swelling, missed menstrual cycles, the absence of a child became apparent. The court's initial hope waned into doubt as the due date passed unnoticed, and Mary returned not with a newborn but with an expression of deep sorrow. Public acknowledgement of her pregnancy never came, the announcement lingering in silence, evaporating like morning mist. This unsettling pattern recurred a few years later, when Mary again believed she was pregnant. Initially, there were signs that invigorated hope, but skepticism soon eclipsed faith as months dragged by without fulfillment. Some contemporaries speculated on psychological explanations for her condition, attributing it to stress and an obsessive longing. Others suggested more dire physical afflictions, such as tumors or early ovarian cancer. However, the royal narrative continued to offer little clarity. The monarchy could ill afford to face the spectre of uncertainty or failure, especially with the fragile restoration of Catholicism and a crumbling marriage. With the absence of an heir, her kingship rested unsteadily on a theological paradox that questioned divine favor. Historians today often scrutinize these occurrences through a lens of medical understanding, yet in 16th century England, Mary's perceived inability to bear children was seen as a moral inadequacy. In stark contrast, Queen Elizabeth I would later garner praise for her strategic decision to remain single. In the wake of Mary's death in 1558, Elizabeth's accession sought to recontextualize Mary's legacy, framing her as a flawed chapter in history, where her phantom pregnancies were woven into tales of divine disapproval. Yet Mary I emerges not as a villainous figure but rather as a devout and isolated woman grappling with the expectations imposed upon her by her society. The profound failure of her body to fulfill this role was eclipsed by state-sanctioned silence. In the annals of royal history, failure manifests in various forms, whether political, personal, or, at times, as part of the more esoteric traditions of the crown, hinting at a cosmic dimension. As we delve deeper into these narratives, the intrigue shifts from physical ailments to mystical interpretations, revealing a world where royal secrets were not merely concealed but inscribed within the very patterns of the heavens. The enduring engagement of the British royal family with astrology reveals unexpected layers of complexity beneath its polished exterior of reason and tradition. While the monarchy is often portrayed as a bastion of rational governance,
the reality is markedly different. Hidden within the opulent environment of palaces, alongside glittering tiaras and solemn treaties, lies a history of astrological consultation that stretches back to the Plantagenets and even earlier. Although these sovereigns publicly asserted their divine right to rule, they maintained a private fascination with celestial phenomena, often seeking guidance from astrologers in matters deemed too intimate for public discourse. One of the earliest references to this practice is found with Queen Elizabeth I and her court astrologer, John Dee. Far from being dismissed as a mere charlatan, Dee played a pivotal role in advising on significant national issues, from military strategies to the timing of coronations, all guided by the stars. His insights were taken seriously, regarded as the work of a learned individual who blended scholarly pursuits with imperial strategy. As time progressed, this royal reliance on astrology, although more discreet, persisted into the Georgian and Victorian eras. Despite the rise of scientific ideals, Queen Victoria's acceptance of astrological insights for her children's potential matchings indicates a deep-rooted reliance on celestial guidance, especially when facing major life choices. The modern monarchy has sought to keep these inclinations shrouded in secrecy, understanding that public acknowledgement of such practices does not align with its image of decorum and diplomacy. By the 20th century, rumours of astrologers lingering in the royal circle continued, with figures like Penny Thornton, a reputable astrologer who purportedly advised Princess Diana during tumultuous periods of her life. The lack of denial from the royal palace regarding these allegations points to a tacit acknowledgement of astrology's role in royal decision-making, providing a semblance of control in an often chaotic world. Today, while the monarchy maintains an exterior of constitutional propriety and practical governance, there exists the ever-present possibility that an astrological chart could inform significant events. For the royals, who navigate a world where every action is scrutinized, the consultation of celestial bodies might offer a private solace amid their public duties. It suggests that their reigns have not only been influenced by law and lineage but also by the stars and, at times, by the clandestine voices of political confidants whose influence shaped history in ways more profound than mere romantic entanglements. Royal mistresses have played a significant and often clandestine role in the politics of the British monarchy for centuries, despite never receiving formal recognition or titles. They were, in essence, an influential yet unacknowledged element within the courtly power dynamic, capable of shaping policies and impacting the fate of governments. Notably, Charles II, dubbed the Merry Monarch, exemplifies this dynamic. His affection toward his mistresses was not merely personal. Figures such as Barbara Palmer, granted the title of Duchess of Cleveland, were central to the political machinations at court, commanding respect and authority that influenced appointments and decisions. Likewise, Louise de Keroualle, an alluring French Catholic, ignited both the king's affections and international tensions, leading to whispers of her serving as a covert agent for France within the court. These royal mistresses, while not officially recognized in state affairs, wielded significant influence that transcended the mere romantic. As the Georgian era unfolded, the impact of royal mistresses continued, albeit in subtler forms. For instance, Henrietta Howard, Countess of Suffolk and long-term companion of King George II, moved adept within spheres of power, utilizing her proximity to the throne to navigate courtly complexities. Politicians keenly sought her endorsement, aware that her insights could sway the king's decisions. However, the role of royal mistresses was not uniform. Some served transiently, bringing irresistible charm but with the potential for significant disruption. For Edward VII, his liaison with Wallis Simpson not only fractured his marriage but redefined the very institution of monarchy. Throughout history, the monarchy has sought to deny official recognition of these relationships, maintaining an intricate web of hidden affairs marked by discrete titles and pensions, yet produced so much informal influence that it belied the historical emphasis on queens. Even in contemporary times, while the notion of a royal mistress may evoke a bygone era, the essence of their influence persists, often rebranded as confidants or close companions. This evolution reflects the enduring relevance of proximity in power dynamics, manifesting in secretive practices that leave a legacy of untold stories. In examining these historical narratives, we find that the inquiry surges beyond sentiment. It probes deeper into issues of identity and belonging within the intricate fabric of royal life. Thus, the exploration of royal cover-ups entails a nuanced understanding of not only romantic entanglements but also the complexities of personal allegiance and influence that transcend the public gaze. The royal family has long been at the center of paternity allegations, a concern particularly poignant for a dynasty where lineage is of paramount importance. In the realm of royalty, paternity transcends mere biological ties. It evokes questions of legitimacy, ascendance, and power. The British Crown has meticulously guarded this narrative, ensuring that doubts surrounding parentage remain largely muted. Yet, the whispers have persisted, echoing through centuries and infiltrating the public's consciousness. The monarchy thrives on the perception of divine lineage, asserting that each successor emerges from a line steeped in nobility. Should this premise falter, the image of an unassailable monarchy risks being seen as a mere performance rather than a destined continuity. One of the earliest and most enduring rumours involves James I of England, previously James VI of Scotland. Born of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Lord Darnley, he has been subject to speculation concerning his true parentage. Darnley's unstable disposition and Mary's dwindling affection have fueled theories suggesting that James was, in fact, sired by one of Mary's confidants. The question of resemblance, coupled with a lack of definitive evidence, has sustained this historical inquiry over time. The case of Elizabeth I exemplifies the tensions surrounding royal parentage. The so-called Virgin Queen was said to have borne an illegitimate child, Arthur Dudley, purportedly fathered by her close associate, Robert Dudley. While Elizabeth refrained from marriage and publicly rejected notions of romantic liaisons, the emergence of a young man claiming royal heritage in Spain years later prompted further speculation. His identity as an impostor or a misguided claimant remained shrouded in mystery, and the monarchy's responses often lean towards erasure over open confrontation. In contemporary contexts, the House of Windsor has not escaped such rumours, with scrutiny falling on the paternity of certain royal offspring, notably Prince Harry. His striking resemblance to James Hoot, an officer linked to Princess Diana, has kept speculation alive since the 1990s. Though timelines and facts seem to dismantle these theories, the allure of conjecture prevails, illustrating the monarchy's deft handling of public perception, opting for silence in the face of sensationalist narratives. In a system deeply invested in legacy, the ramifications of these whispered assertions can be profound. While the structural integrity of the monarchy may remain unshaken, these insidious doubts can erode perceptions of legitimacy. As such, the Crown's tendency to bury uncomfortable truths only furthers the intrigue, leaving behind a tapestry of suspicion woven into the fabric of royal history. Ultimately, some secrets may not be scandalous. Rather, they manifest as unsettling but neatly arranged enigmas within the royal narrative. The British monarchy has exhibited a notable and perplexing expertise over the centuries in managing the narrative surrounding royal tragedies. This capacity does not extend to the prevention of such tragedies, an ambition beyond even the most powerful crown, but rather to their concealment and recontextualization. This practice becomes particularly pronounced when royal deaths threaten to disrupt the established narrative. Official announcements regarding such deaths tend to emerge with alarming expedients, characterized by brevity, vagueness, and an almost finality that seems designed to quash inquiry. A salient example is Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, the grandson of Queen Victoria and second in line to the throne, who died unexpectedly at just 28. While the official cause of his death was reported as pneumonia, rumors have endured, speculating on possibilities such as syphilis, suicide, or even his alleged connection to the Jack the Ripper investigation, hypotheses that, despite being largely dismissed, never fully dissipated. The priority here appeared to be less about establishing the truth, and more about swiftly curtailing public discourse. Similarly, the enigmatic death of George, Duke of Kent, Edward VIII's younger brother, during a 1942 plane crash remains clouded in mystery. The official narrative pointed to poor weather and pilot error as causes, yet the absence of transparency surrounding the flight's details, alongside speculation of sensitive cargo and secret missions, has fueled ongoing conspiracy theories, including notions of unofficial diplomatic engagements with Nazi Germany. From these instances, it becomes evident that the official explanations provided are often more sanitized and constructed than revelatory. Another illustrative case is that of Prince John, the last son of George V and Queen Mary, who passed away in 1919 at 13 after a life largely spent in seclusion due to epilepsy and possibly autism. His death was handled with such efficiency that it raised eyebrows. The media coverage was scant, the public mourning was subdued, and grand ceremonies were conspicuously absent. The palace framed it as a quiet family tragedy. However, the rapid erasure of his existence from public memory hints at deeper discomfort. The monarchic ideal left no room for differences among royal children. Even in contemporary times, royal deaths invite scrutiny. The tragic accident of Princess Diana in 1997 is perhaps the most notorious example. Though there has been no definitive proof of foul play, the pervasive distrust surrounding the royal family during that period rendered their explanations unconvincing, not due to factual inaccuracies but a profound lack of openness. The emerging pattern is unmistakable. When untimely death encroaches upon the crown, particularly in ways that might stain its polished image of moral superiority, a protective mechanism begins to unfold. Official statements are meticulously crafted prior to even the most fundamental rituals of mourning. Archives are selectively sealed, and the complexities of once living individuals are often distilled into concise, controlled obituaries. Yet, not all royal secrets remain cloistered within shadows. Some are interred beneath marble monuments, adorned with flags, and honored with calculated expressions of grief. Still, the pervasive silence enveloping such deaths can sometimes resonate louder than any eulogy. The monarchy's foundation rests not on truth, but on a carefully cultivated belief system. And nothing poses a greater challenge to this belief than a death that disrupts the carefully crafted script of royal perfection.